Alexa, turn on studio. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome in. It is a Top 16 show here, an Hoopsville exclusive. I'm your host, Dave McHugh. Welcome in. Yet another show on a Thursday. If you joined us earlier today, thank you for joining us a second time. If you missed our show earlier today, you should check that one out. It's a normal Hoopsville, and it airs on Mondays and Thursdays at 12 Eastern. This is a little bit different. We've been hosting the Top 16 show for the last handful of years. For a few years, we actually revealed who the top 16 would be in men's and women's basketball should the tournaments be started this weekend. An opportunity for us to preview the Division III tournaments with a little bit more interest in the weeks leading up, but also to give everybody a sense of where teams stood, give the committees a chance to do a little bit of work as well. Last year, NPI came along and threw a monkey wrench into the plans. You already know the top 16 if you really want to look for them, not only because there's great sources like Matt Snyder and his brother Zach, or there's Scott Peterson and others who can compile that information, but the NCAA now reveals that top 16 along the way this week. So we've augmented things tonight. We're still going to talk about the top 16. We're going to still reveal the top 16, at least let you know where everybody stands. And we're still going to have a very important exclusive conversation with our committee chairs about what goes into the entire process of bracketing, for example, what some of the challenges they may have to face in this year in particular, especially with the men having that special championship with Division II, NIT, and Division I at the Final Four, and how that affects the schedules. But also because every year there's some kind of quirk in terms of what teams are good, who will be in the tournament, and whatnot. So we'll be going through all of that. We'll also share some of the important dates and talk to the committee chairs. And then after that conversation, we're going to have a wonderful chat with Matt Snyder, who is co-host with his brother Zach of D3 Datacast. And we'll talk to Scott Peterson, who has his own data site, the D3 Lab. We'll talk about what teams could possibly be in the top 4, 8, or 16 when it's actually all said and done. We'll also talk about conference races you should watch, teams you should keep an eye on that could change a lot of things in terms of bracketing, and most importantly, the bid thieves. Bid thieves are teams that may end up winning a conference, or we should say have conferences that have a lock, and that's it. And if that team doesn't make the tournament as an AQ, they will get the at-large. Well, that's a bid going to an AQ that would have gone to another at-large. So we'll talk all about that coming up. If you've got questions for us, you are more than welcome to email us along the way, hoopsville@d3sports.com. We'll do our best to get those questions answered. You can also ask them on the social page, or as a former Division III coach is in the live chat, you can say hi to us there on YouTube as well. I want to thank our partners at d3hoops.com and the Women's Basketball Coaches Association for their help with our show. And most importantly, I want to thank Division III's national committees who have encouraged us to continue this show and make themselves available as the chairs to answer questions. So lots to get to, a lot to talk about. There is plenty to cover. We shall start on the men's side of things because if you don't know, when it comes to hosting in Division III for the most part, or priorities, even years, the men have priority the opening weekend, women have priority the second weekend. As a result of that, we'll start with the men this year. And reminder, this is the NPI data as of today from the NCAA through Wednesday's games. Any game that's already taken place today is not a factor here. And because there isn't a lot of surprise or whatnot, we will start with the top 8 in men's basketball on the NPI. And you start with Emory at their 18-3 record, but they've got the best NPI number of a 71,691. That's a whole point plus better than the defending champs Trinity Connecticut, who sit in second at 22-2, and a significant margin higher than Randolph-Macon as well, who's also 22-2, sitting in third. So you've got the UAA in Emory, you got the NESCAC in Trinity, and you have the ODAC in Randolph-Macon in the top 3. Then you go back to the UAA to U Chicago, sitting in fourth. We're 19-3 with an 864 winning percentage, and now you dip below 70 for a 69914. St. Thomas from the SCAC appears in fifth, followed by Mary Washington in sixth with 21 wins each, both within about a point of each other. But notice how close St. Thomas is to U Chicago. Then you go back to the NESCAC, and Tufts appears at 7th with a 19-4 record and a 67-613 NPI, and Christopher Newport about a half point behind them, sitting in 8th with a 19-4 overall record. So that is a couple of UAA schools in Emory and Chicago. You've got a couple of C2C schools at 6th and 8th at Mary Washington and Christopher Newport. And you've got two NESCACs in Trinity and Tufts with a SCAC and an ODAC mixed in. Now let's look at 9 through 16. Wesleyan, another NESCAC school with a 19-5 record, one of the, you say, lowest winning percentages, sitting in 9th with 67 NPI. Montclair State fell to 10th. They lost for the first time last night as the last remaining undefeated in Division III. They're now 24-1 with a 6.6815. Endicott holding strong with their one loss on the season. They're sitting in 11th up there in New England, followed by Illinois Wesleyan out of the CCIW. They've got a 20-4 mark and a 66. Notice there's a bottleneck essentially at 66 NPI points. Mount Union comes in. They were in the championship game 2 years ago. They're 23-2 in the 13th spot, sitting just a hair outside of 66. Gustavus Adolphus from the MIAC. They suffered a loss a week ago, but they're still hanging strong in the top 16. Followed by Hood out of the MAC Commonwealth. They suffered their first loss in conference just this week. And then Redlands, who got a huge win over Claremont Mudd Scripps just last night, maybe helped get them into this top 16. So that's the men's top 16 as we see it right now. And a reminder, we'll talk later to Matt Snyder about how this top 16 can change. And this top 16 is important because this is an opportunity to maybe in the opening weekend be in a hosting position or at least in a very good seated position. Top 8 in the men's side is a rather important one when it comes to hosting the second weekend, which will only see 8 hosts hosting single games on Friday and Saturday. The women's side, that's different. There'll only be 4 hosts on that second weekend, which makes their seating a little bit more interesting. And we turn to that. Looking at number 1, and you got an interesting one if you haven't seen this one. UW Oshkosh is on top at 22-2 with a 917 winning percentage and a 6.8469 NPI. Notice that's ahead of 4 undefeated programs. It does come down to scheduling, and it comes down to who you beat. NYU, the defending national champs several times over and winners of 85, I think it is now, straight games. It's NYU at 22-0, sitting in the second spot, followed by Johns Hopkins, who's undefeated as well at 66-743, and then WNL at 24-0 at 66.364. Quick note on those 4. Again, if everything wasn't worked out in bracketing, everything worked out and they continued to win, they would be in the best position to be hosting the second weekend. But notice that's 3 schools on the East Coast and 1 in Wisconsin. It may not work out this way. Scranton's another East Coast team sitting in 5th at 24-0, but with a 6.5, 181. Their conference is a little bit down this year, probably allowing Scranton to fall out of the top 4. But Oshkosh's strong schedule and a strong conference is why they're number 1. Denison is 23-1 in 6th, followed by Bowdoin out of the NESCAC at 22-1, sitting in 7th, about a point behind. And then Wisconsin Whitewater an 18-6 mark and a 63.496. You kind of see if Whitewater's sitting in 8th, how Oshkosh can be sitting up there in 1st from the WIAC. You then go to 9 through 16, I should say. John Carroll from the OAC, followed by Ohio Wesleyan from the OAC in the 9th and 10th spot. Sorry, not OAC, NCAC. 21-3, followed by 20-3. Both have pretty close to identical NPI numbers, a difference of 0.2. Wisconsin Platteville, another WIAC school, slides in here at 11th. They're also 18-6. Followed by Hope, who's having a non-Hope year. We're not used to seeing 3 losses from a Hope squad. They're at 21-3. Followed by Concordia Moorhead from the MIAC, also at 21-3. That's a typo on the screen. That's a 61.944. Followed by Smith Pioneers out of the New Mac. Rare we see Smith with a loss in season. They have won this year, but have been playing pretty well since. Then Carroll out of the CCIW at 20-4 this season, a 61.815, and the only school to have both teams in the top 16, it's Chicago women at 16-5. with a 71.4. That's a 61.427. So a couple typos there. I do apologize. So interesting results on the women's side, and one we will continue to follow. And again, Scott Peterson will be on to explain these a little bit better and get a better understanding of who could be in the top 16, some of the movement there. Could Scranton get into the top 4? Is there a means of doing that just because the WNL might lose? Notice there was somewhat of a big gap between the two. Let's talk about some of the important dates coming up. We'll start on the men's side. And again, this is a unique year on the men's side of things because you do have a championship that's going to be played in Indianapolis in April. So the selection show will be March 2nd. That's a Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern on NCAA.com. Then the first 2 rounds will be played on March 6th and March 7th at the host sites. Again, that's why this top 16 is so important. If you could have it all even, you would have your hosts at those top 16. We'll talk to the committee chairs about why that's not always feasible. Then they'll have the round of 16 on March 13th and 14th. So basically, you're going to take the round of 16, which will be 4 games on one day and 4 games on another at 8 different sites. They did this back in 2020. That was the schedule plan. They also did this in 2013, the last time this plan went to fruition and we played the championship game in Atlanta. The difference was the round of 16 wasn't split over 2 days. 2020, that became a thing. COVID shut things down right before these round of 16 games got played on Friday. Of course, it got shut down on Thursday. Quarterfinals and semifinals will be at Allen County War Memorial Coliseum in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Quarterfinals are Thursday, March 19th. There'll be 2 sessions. That's why we split it on the screen there. The first semifinals will be at 1 and 3:30, followed by the second set at 6:30 and 9 p.m. Eastern for both. As I understand, it'll be 2 different tickets for those 2 different sessions. The semifinals will be 2 days later, Saturday, March 21st, 5:30 and 8 p.m. for those semifinals. All of those games will air on ESPN+. The championship will be at Gainbridge Fieldhouse in Indianapolis, Indiana, April 5th at 4:30 p.m. again on ESPN+. How about the women's side of things? Their selection shows March 2nd at 2:30 Eastern Time, followed by the first 2 rounds, also on March 6th and 7th at the top host site. Their sectionals will be at March 13th and 14th, also at the top or the hosting site of an institution, which is why the top 4 is important, but may not be the be-all and end-all. Semifinals and championship this year. There will be at Krager Center in Roanoke College in Salem, Virginia. Semifinals on Thursday, March 19th at 5 and 7:30, followed by the championship at 4 o'clock on Saturday, March 21st. So there you go. That is a sense of what the top 16 look like, important dates that are coming up. When we come back, we will talk to both national committee chairs about what these top 16 mean to them, what the bracketing process will look like, and a whole lot more. We'll try and get some of your questions answered as well. And still ahead, we'll hear from Matt Snyder and Scott Peterson about how these top 16 can change and ebb and flow, where to watch games, where bid thieves will take place, and conference races that will be a must. You're listening to Hoopsville, presented by D3Hoops.com from the WBCA studios. This is the Top 16 shows. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back with more in just a bit.
We've got more schools than Division I, more fans than Division II, and more upsets than March Madness. There's nearly 850 programs with over 11,000 games leading to 2 national championships. And we've been covering it all for over 2 decades. From Eastern to Occidental, from Puget Sound to Piedmont, from Southwestern to the University of New England, and from Hope to Calvin. Nobody covers Division III basketball like we do. We're D3Hoops.com at www.d3hoops.com.
The National Association of Basketball Coaches is the nation's premier professional development and advocacy organization for basketball coaches at every level. The NABC strives to serve as the voice for coaches on national issues while advancing the core value of leadership, service, advocacy, education, and inclusion. To learn more about the NABC and to become a member, visit NABC.com and follow the NABC on social media at NABC 1927. That's NABC.com or NABC 1927 on social media.
It's on us to stop sexual assault.
In any way that we can.
To get a friend home safe.
To never blame the victim.
It's on us.
To stand up.
To make our community safe for all.
It's on us.
It's on us to look out for each other at parties.
It's on us.
To be more than just a bystander.
To step up and say something.
It's on us, all of us.
To stop sexual assault.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
If I lose, I'll respond with respect.
If I win, I'll back it up with humility.
If I fail, I'll rise up with honor. It's tough for us to put it all on the line.
Don't undo my hard work with poor sportsmanship.
Respect. It's the name of the game.
Coach of the Year, Administrator of the Year, All-America Team, Wade Trophy. The WBCA doesn't just honor coaches, but players, administrators, and much more. The WBCA strives to honor those who have contributed to the advancement of women's basketball. Celebrate the present, honor the past, look to the future.
I used to never really talk, ever. I was afraid if I said something wrong, everyone would laugh at me. But then I started to play golf with Special Olympics. It helped me to find my voice. And now everyone else is speechless.
Welcome back to Hoopsville, everybody. Hope you're enjoying the show. This is the Top 16 show where we get a chance to talk as if the tournaments were starting this weekend with the top 16 teams and obviously a lot of unknowns, but you still get a good sense of the top 16 teams of where things need to be and who's where and what. If you got questions for us, you can email us, hoopsville@d3sports.com, or join us on our Facebook stream. You're right, Alan. I'm fully aware of the nickname change, but old habits are die hard, and I'm sure committee chair can set me straight about Smith's Bears. When they don't change the logo, it throws me. Not because it's not a good thing. You don't need to change the logo. But my head's like, oh, there's no change. If you got questions, send them along. I'm going to talk to the committee chairs now on an exclusive opportunity to discuss what we kind of just saw in the grand scheme of things in that top 16. It's all NPI based. It's a little easier for our committees now. And joining us to talk about it on the air is Cam Fuller, the athletics director at, where are you now? St. Norbert, right? That's where I think we have you. And then Kristen Hughes at the Bears of Smith. You think I get that right just because I'm a Bears fan. First and foremost, both of you guys, obviously the NPI makes it a lot easier in terms of you didn't have to go through the process that you two would have been familiar with from a couple of years ago of doing this entire top 16. But it's the second year. I'm guessing you're still trying to understand and get an appreciation of how this NPI really measures things, even if, Cam, in your case, you are coming from a hockey school.
Yeah, NPI has been around for a few years on the ice hockey side of things. But, I think you raised a point, too. I mean, we've had the benefit, I think, the whole month of February of really kind of building scenarios, building mocks, building brackets. The old format was a little bit more difficult just because you had some ideas, and certainly here over the next week, a lot could happen. But, the NPI has certainly allowed us to have some of those conversations much earlier than we did under the prior format.
Well, and Kristen, to that point, that's what we heard last year too, right? Like this NPI allows you guys to work a little bit more on the other aspects of your job, which is the bracketing and the hosting and getting everybody ready for the tournament instead of getting bogged down with a selection process, which, by the way, a lot of people do enjoy, but it is labor intensive.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think as a committee,
you get a lot more efficient, right? I mean, those Sunday nights are still going to be long because the bracketing is complicated and there's a lot of layers to it. But at the same time, at least you can get right into that work right away based on these numbers. And, I think the beauty of this second year now is we're going to be able to really look back and see if we have these dials right. And if the teams that are getting in and where they're being seated, if we're really kind of, valuing that body of work from a season. So I think there's going to be some good conversations in the spring meetings as well.
Obviously, there's a lot of data. It was interesting. I got an email from somebody saying, well, why don't they do this instead of NPI? It needs to be changed. And my argument was, well, first off, we haven't had enough data to understand that. And second off, it's going to take a little longer than a couple of years before we're punting on NPI. Kristen, I'm curious from your women's perspective. I'm going to get to Cam in a minute because it's going to be a little bit more of an in-depth conversation, but you don't have the weighted measure. You have a straight kind of, like everybody has, a straight NPI number that bases everything on how you set up your dials. I know we kind of tap dance on this and you want more data, but do you think it does a good job of setting up how the division is represented in terms of the best teams and all of that?
I think we're close. And I think I said this on the last call, I think we're pretty close. I think that as a group, we did some good work a year ago to get these dials close. I think we're going to have conversations around the quality win. And if that number is where we want it to be, that's probably the one that I think we're going to spend the most time on. I think we're going to take a look at, is 15 the right number of games? Should that number be higher or lower? Those are the two areas that I think I could see us tweaking a little bit. We'll have a broader conversation, but so I think we're close to it, but I do think we may make a few changes.
Cam, to your side, you do have the weighted measure, and it continues to be a little bit of a bugaboo. The NCAA continues to send out data that sometimes needs to be massaged in terms of that weighted measure, which, to remind everybody, if you play an away game, it's a 1.2 press on the pedal, for lack of a better description. Home game's 0.8, but if it's a conference game, it's 1.1 and 0.9. Again, do you think it's being fairly measured, and have we figured out the bugs on making sure we know the data is being accurate to you as a committee?
One thing we talked a lot about when we were setting the dials was how do we continue to try to take what the committee has really valued over the years, which is playing strong competition potentially on the road. And when you do that, you should get rewarded. And that's really why we took the weighted dial approach. As you noted, I don't think many, if any, other sports took that approach, but we felt like that was more accurate of how, we really valued the field in the past. So that's something that I think we've been pleased with, because I think if you look at, St. Thomas, for example, look at their schedule they've played. I mean, they've played in some cases a national schedule. So I think it's really allowed teams to understand, hey, if you're going to play good teams and if you're going to do it on the road and you're going to win, you're going to get valued for that, and you're going to get some bonus points in terms of how the NPI is calculated.
Kristen, it's interesting. I've heard people talking on the women's side about some frustrations with some teams that never seem to leave their gyms. This is what happened on the men's side a number of years ago, which got to this weighted side over on the SOS days. When you talk about reevaluating things, do you think that one's going to come up?
I don't, only because I think, it wasn't it wasn't a dial that we spent a whole lot of time on first time around. I think we just felt like a win's a win, a loss, and we weren't going to put that weight on it on the women's side. So, I could certainly be wrong on that. We've got different committee members, but I would say at least the first time around, we did not spend a lot of time thinking that was one of the numbers we wanted to really emphasize.
Obviously, all this NPI and top 16 leads to one major thing, and that is the bracketing side of all this. And it helps you all understand who the top 16 are, and ultimately, when other teams make the tournament, what their NPI ranking is, to understand approximately where they would fit in a bracket if you were to try and make it a perfect, 1v64, 2v63 type scenario. Kristen, when you look at what you're getting in terms of that top 16, you look at who's just on the outside who could potentially enter into that top 16, and you all start doing your mock bracketing and stuff. Are you starting to sense where you're going to need to do some of that work?
In terms of the NPI or in terms of the bracketing?
In terms of the bracketing, from what you're seeing with that top 16.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some regions that have, a lot of teams packed in there that, granted a lot may change this week as we start to move through, conference tournaments and all that. I don't think the numbers are going to shift too dramatically much. But I think that there's definitely some regions that could be a little challenging in terms of trying to, fit everybody where they need to go. I know that we'll do sort of a first run at it and try to do a straight up bracket, like we have no problems and no challenges and no restrictions. And then we'll go back probably another 72 times and, pull it apart and try to make it all fit, which is why Sunday night is so long, and try to really, protect the competitive equity for all the seeds. So there's definitely some regions that I think we're seeing are going to be potential headaches, but we'll see how it all plays out.
And Cam, we'll dive into the particulars on the men's side of why it'll be a little bit more unique, but just straight up in terms of the bracket and obviously the opening 2 weeks, same question. Are you already starting to find some areas that are going to be a bit of a challenge?
I think that's the beauty of the MPI is you could see it. It's not a secret what our numbers are and where our team stands. So, we can, to Kristen's point, we'll take the process of building the quote unquote perfect bracket, a 1 to 64. And then, there's going to be the manipulations that need to be had, whether it's geography, whether it's a team didn't put in a host, whether it's any of the hangups that are outside of the committee's control. And then, we'll have the potential to hopefully build the best bracket from there. But, as we look at things as it stands, there's an opportunity for a Texas pod, an opportunity for a California pod. And we've been talking through those scenarios as a committee. Now, to Kristen's point, over the next week, things will probably change 18 times, here in the next 48 hours, and another 18 times after that. But I think that's, again, the beauty of the data's there. So we can really start to have these conversations earlier and maybe vet out some scenarios as well.
Cam, let me emphasize too, this top 16 is great, but what does it actually represent? Like we talk about protecting seeds, or other people do. It's not necessarily protection because there's a lot of variables here, but what does the 16 represent when it comes down to bracketing, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we try to do is look at our top seeds and try to build the bracket from there. But the reality of it is there's this 500-mile geographic restriction that we have to honor. And we're going to build a bracket that hopefully keeps the seeds as accurate as possible. But at the end of the day, we don't have unlimited flights that we can use. We don't have the ability for every school to put into host. So there's going to be restrictions right out of the gate that we can't control. In a perfect world, Chris and I would love to be able to say, hey, here's a 1 to 64 bracket. Let's roll out the balls and let's do it. But, that's not reality. So I think that's what we've really tried to do as a committee is try to keep teams as close to their seed as possible, knowing there's going to be some restrictions in place that are outside of our control.
And Kristen, to some degree, even the top 4 is no guarantee, right? Like there could be variables. We saw 3 right now on the East Coast. The top 5, there's 4. You might need a host somewhere else. You may need to do something that's going to pull somebody away from hosting as much as you'd like to give it to them, right? Or do you think you can get away with that many hosts in one area?
Well, I mean, I think, we're going to prioritize sort of the matchups, right? Going back to that competitive equity piece. So I don't think you can go in a perfect world. Yes, we would love to guarantee the hosting, but I don't think that that's reality. So that's not the priority in terms of when we talk about protecting seeds. So we're going to prioritize who the matchups are against. And that, again, has ripple effects in other pods. And then that's where it starts to get really, really complicated. But I think for us as a committee, we really try to look at those matchups, really try to protect those seeds in terms of who they're going to be playing. And that's really how we've tried to build these brackets in the past.
When we talk about trying to get that equity and that balance, when you look at and obviously women don't have priority opening weekend, but we're not seeing a lot of scenarios where maybe we have both teams in play to host. Doesn't mean it doesn't change, as you said, doesn't mean there aren't other variables. But if all things were even, you look at the hosting scenario, have you gotten a sense, some of the fall sports got hampered by the government shutdown, which really affected air travel, so there was some restriction on trying to send teams. But we're starting to see some reins loosening up. Do you get a sense that you might be able to be creative and be able to hold teams where they've earned it in this top 16 and send some teams on flights that in the past few years you may not have?
I would say that I think we are going to try to be creative. If we will be successful, I'm not sure, right? Because those are going to be some bigger conversations. But I think that, and I'm sure Cam's committee is the same way, like you do the best job you can to really reward those teams for the season that they've had. And I think we all try to, push the margins a little bit and try to get this bracket to reflect that. It doesn't always end up playing out that way, but I guess we'll see how creative both Cam and I can get. We'll let you know.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to finding out. Cam, same question, but from a
You're
different
either going to
perspective.
ask us back or kick us off.
Oh,
Sorry.
I'll definitely ask you back. Then we'll talk
I meant
about
the
it.
NCAA.
Yeah, true. Cam, for a different perspective on the same question, though, you talked about the uniqueness of maybe having a Texas pod or a California pod. Both committees have really pushed over the last few years of trying to get a rule in place in Division III that on the opening weekend you don't play, or maybe the opening 2 rounds, depending on who's talking and what language you want to use here, because in some sports, the second round's on another weekend. Not playing your conference foe. It almost feels like if you do create a Texas pod or you do create that California pod, you're going to get forced into having conference foes on the opposite ends. They're going to have to face off in the second weekend. And we kind of talked about it last time, but now with more eyes on what is going on. Would you rather put together a pod that gets out to California and rewards that, or keep those California teams, SCIAC teams, or keep 2 Texas teams away from each other in reality and thus send everybody else somewhere?
What we've really tried to do is obviously in the first round ensure that there's no conference matchups. Right. But I think it goes back to a point that we've made is I use this analogy with our committee and elsewhere is I see the bracket like a giant game of Jenga. And we're going to try to build the best bracket possible. However, if doing one thing is going to sacrifice the whole bracket, well, then we're going to have a conversation to figure out, do we want to pull that piece out and the whole thing could crumble, or do we want to see if that will work, right? So I think to that question, it's really hard in a vacuum to say, hey, just that scenario won't impact the rest of the bracket. Well, it could. So now we have to have that conversation to see, hey, is that a piece we want to pull out? Or do we want to maybe pull it halfway out and pull it back in and realize, this might not be the best thing for the overall bracket? So that's really how we've really tried to look at it. Obviously, first round, not going to touch that. And then moving forward, it's how can we ensure that the bracket integrity stays intact?
If you had your druthers, though, would you rather reward California? And I'm not trying to pin you down to say, on March 2nd you said otherwise. I'm just saying, would you as a committee chair, would you rather reward that California group with another pod? I think it happened a couple of years ago, which was wonderful. Or would you rather try and keep those teams from knocking each other off? I mean, especially as an AD, if you put your AD hat on, which would you rather have?
Yeah, I think it's, like I said, Dave, I think it's hard to answer that question in a vacuum because, again, we're not building a bracket where we're only looking at one pod. We have to look at the entire 64 teams. So, in a vacuum, it'd be great to be able to look at just that scenario, but we know that one scenario will impact the other 60 teams in the bracket. So that's really how we've always tried to continue to go back to what's our North Star, what's our guiding post, which is let's reward the best teams possible and let's build the best bracket possible. And if that means that by doing that, we have a California pod, then we're going to do it. If it means, hey, we can't do that because it's going to really enable our bracket, then okay, now we need to say, is this the best thing that again fits the overall experience of all 64 teams in the tournament?
When we look at the women's side, Kristen, you've got this kind of scenario that could be playing out where you have a team from the Northwest Conference, a team from the SCIAC, maybe a team in Colorado College from the SCAC, and another team from Texas, all island. I think a number of years ago, the easy answer would have been, all right, send everybody to one and we just don't worry about it and they'll play it through and blah, blah, blah. We're slam dunk. Thank you very much. And we'll pod the rest of it. There's another adage of saying, well, that doesn't seem exactly fair for all the Region 10s. Have you guys already started to see that? And are you trying to figure out the best solution to that?
I mean, I think we're in the early stages of talking about that, Dave. I think to Cam's point, it's hard to look at just one area in isolation. So I think, you're going to try to start building these pods out. And then when they don't make sense, or when they feel maybe, this doesn't feel like a great fit or a great experience for one pod, you start to move people around in other areas. And it's usually not just one sort of ripple. It's probably like 3 other layers of effect. And sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad. So I think we're going to do the best we can to try to be fair to all the teams. But again, I don't think we're going to go in leaning with the priority of hosting as the reward. We are going to lean into the priority of trying to give you the best matchup. And that's what we're going to put the most value on.
Before going any further, one of the ideas, Cam, that you brought up was kind of the understanding of what that process, the arc, as it were, of all the teams you get in terms of bracketing and how you start into this bracketing process. Like, how do you get this running moving forward? Do you start at the top, divvy everybody up? Do you start somewhere else? Like, how do you guys actually get off the ground in terms of getting everybody spread out, figure out where they deserve to go, where you'd like them to go, whatever, and get that bracketing put together?
So we'll actually really, on Monday, which is when our national committee call is, really start to dive into the 1 to 64. And we use an S curve, which basically means top 4 on the bottom, and then you go down to 5, 6, 7, 8. So the S curve to the 64 is what we'll start with. But in some ways, you also build a little backwards. You have to look at the third round, and you have to look at how do you create pods where you're not going to have flight issues in the third round. So in a way, you can't build the bracket in isolation only on the first weekend. You have to also consider the third round. And then what we're going to do with our committee this year, and again, we learned a lot last year with the NPI and what that meant for building the bracket is on Monday, we're going to talk a little bit more about kind of each committee member will really start to dive in with a buddy as we build the bracket through the week to make sure that things like interconference, just, I'm going to call it the low-hanging fruit that sometimes and Krista can relate to this, when you're in the room for so long and you're looking at your screen for so long, things can start to get together or mush together. So we'll have some fresh minds just looking at things for the first time in terms of seeing things. So that's really what we're going to try to do this upcoming week is really spend Monday to, we've had some good conversations. We've been really more focused on the 16-32, but this week we'll really start to narrow in on the 64, knowing that it'll be interesting. I'll be interested to see on Monday what the 64 looks like versus on Sunday what the 64 Monday during the selection show, what the 64 looks like. But I actually think it's just good practice to do that, because then when we get later in the week and now we're really building the bracket, we're not having some of those conversations for the first time. It might be the 5th or 6th time we're having that conversation. So that's really what we learned last year, I think, was how do we really utilize our time wisely in the month of February, and then certainly that last week leading into selection weekend.
And Chris, I'll get you in a second, but Cam, to that point, there was a lot of talk last year, almost kind of, you guys were getting used to the NPI. So there was this kind of hybrid of the old style and the new style, the old style of trying to understand your potting, right? And how you lined everybody up. Now the NPI kind of reveals like, no, these are teams 1 through quote unquote 64. Obviously it's not 64 until you get 64. Where are you, the last year when the question came up, is an easy way of saying this. The answer was, we don't look at seeding. We look at trying to balance the 1 and 4 pods. And what I mean by that is the 1 pod is the number 1 seed in his pod, and the number 4 in their pod, and number 2 in their pod, and the number 3 in their pod. Is that still the mentality? Are you guys trying to, as it sounds, maybe go a little bit more towards seeding in terms of what those teams are actually ranked versus what they are potted?
With the advent of the NPI, the beauty is we now have the ability to see 1 to 64. So I think it really allows us to stay true to where a team is ranked. Now, for all the reasons Chris and I have talked about, you're never going to have the perfect 1 to 64. But it really allows us to start with the perfect bracket and then come into the facility availability, come into the geographical restrictions. So that's really what we've tried to do in the past, and what we've tried to do in the future, especially this year, is having the NPI. We can see it now. Obviously, when we're building the pods, we don't want to have a really what I'd call an unbalanced pod, where when you look at the sum value of the 4 teams, you don't want to have some wacky things where you have some big gaps between one pod and another. But again, that's the beauty of having the 1 to 64 NPI is we can really spend a lot of time trying to ensure that we keep teams as close to that as possible, knowing the restrictions we have in play.
Kristen, would you almost start it as if it's 1 through 64, go 1v64, 2v63, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, line that all up and then go, okay, what's feasible? Or is that not helpful? Like, where do you get started in terms of the actual lining up of brackets, and then where do you go to start making it work based on the rules of Division III?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of, like you put teams in, you pull them out. But again, what Cam has said, like, we'll start with, if we had no restrictions, here's what this would be a perfect bracket. Here's what it would look like. We'll do a lot of the pre-work that's going on right now in terms of mileage between schools, in terms of who you've played non-conference, all of that. So that at least when we are starting to pull teams out and put them in a different pod and slide them around, we have some of that information that really starts to drive whether or not we land, firmly with a pod or not. So I don't think there's another way to do it. I think if you start that way, then you already come in sort of with that focus of trying to protect seeds as much as you can. And that's really what we're trying to do. So you start with what's perfect, what's the absolute best sense. And then you try to make all those changes as few and as minimal as possible to try to, again, really protect that seeding.
I would love it if you guys could do that 1 through 64, set it up, the perfect one, and submit it. And just see what they say. Just see.
Well, Dave, Cam, and I want to make you happy, so we're going to do that next week and see what happens.
I just share with me the email.
Yeah.
I just want to see the reply. To that point, Kristen, though, again, you top 16 is nice. Priorities will be for the men on the opening weekend. I don't think we're going to have a major issue with that this year around, but how many flights can you get away with? When they're talking about flights, Kristen, they're not talking about that opening weekend only. They're also looking ahead at that second weekend, right? They're looking at the permutations and the what ifs. However, you can play this what if game until we go round and round and round and come up with 100 different flights, and you could scuttle the whole thing. At what point can you go back and say, listen, at some point, if they win, we've got an upset. We can't plan for that.
Yeah, I mean, none of us have a crystal ball here in terms of figuring out what these results are. And so I think, you try to go in with this bracket and you sort of have these edges, right? Here are some of the extremes of what could happen in terms of flights, but it also can swing the other way. Like, you can't only have the conversation about more flights. You could have a conversation where there's a lot less flights, right? And so I think you have to try to land that plane somewhere in the middle, because both extremes could happen. And certainly as a committee, we'll try to make that argument. If having, more in one round is the best bracket, we would try to fight for that and see if we can get it.
Cam, on the flip side, you've already, we talked about it being a unique bracket. You've got to deal with that third weekend, which is great because we get to see 8 hosts. We get to see 4 games on a Friday. We get to see 4 games on a Saturday, something we wanted to see actually happen in 2020, the last time we had this opportunity. But that adds a bit of a challenge. You talked about it earlier. They're not going to just allow 8 flights that weekend. They're going to have to deal with flights just to get to Fort Wayne eventually, but they're not going to let you just have whatever you want. So to some degree, are you going to have to deal with middle out? Does that make sense? Like, are you going to try and build for what works that weekend and go from there? How do you think you can tackle that, which works, lets everyone have their cake and eat it too?
Yeah, this year, I think we have an advantage because we're not in that third weekend bringing 4 teams to one site. We're bringing 1 team to one site. 3 teams to a site. So I think that's where, as I thought about the third weekend, knowing it's 1 game, 1 site, I think there's some advantage to that. However, like I mentioned earlier, how do we really look at the third weekend and almost have to assume chalk in each of the pods when we're thinking about the flights? Because to Kristen's point, there could be 50 permutations in terms of who wins or their upsets. So there's some just assumptions we have to go in and make when we build the bracket for the third weekend. But again, knowing that this is just a Sweet 16 weekend, and then obviously we'll flow into Fort Wayne for the Elite Eight Final Four, and then Indianapolis for the national championship. I think there could be an advantage there just in terms of what that bracket will look like for us, with it only being that one round on campus for the third round.
You say it's easier because it's just one team. I'd argue it's tougher because instead of having one host and you essentially get 1,000 miles, because 500 could go in one direction, 500 could go in another, you meet in the middle. And so you can kind of bring in someone from one side of a country and another from another part of the country, et cetera. You're only going to have those 500 miles around one school. Like, that feels like that might be a little bit more restrictive.
In terms of, say that again, Dave?
So if you're hosting a pod, you could put a host in X point, and you could have 500 miles to the east, 500 miles to the north, 500 miles to the west, 500 miles to the south, and bring people in to that pod, versus when you just have two teams, it's only 500 miles. Like,
yeah,
you could have more variety in that pod. Now you're nailed down to just one matchup that you got a mileage out. That feels more restrictive.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't say it'd be easier. I said I think it's something that could help us this year. Now, again, in a week, we might realize, maybe that didn't help us. But I think my point, though, is you're just traveling less teams to a site. So because of that, it kind of is what it is. As we think about when the bracket flows through, instead of, oh gosh, we got 3 teams coming here and they're all 750 miles away. I mean, now it's one team coming in. So that's where we're going to have to do some assumptions for the third round as we build the first and second round bracket to ensure, to your point from earlier, just because we minimize flights in the first weekend, we still have to consider the second weekend if we're building the bracket as well.
Kristen, I can't remember if you were on the committee when the last time the women had the dual championships, where Trinity, you didn't. Okay. Women haven't done this.
Oh, that's a lie. No, I wasn't. We were in it. I wasn't on the committee.
Yes, you were in
Sorry.
it.
Yep.
Smith's been in it a lot.
The Bears, Dave.
The women haven't had this Sweet 16 for, I know it's not the right lexicon, the round of 16, where they split up and have one host on these dual championships. It's been 2, then 2, and then we go play the Final Four, and then the championships played somewhere else. Have you all talk a lot. Have you all looked at that and said, next duel, maybe that's something we want to do and celebrate women's basketball with that Elite Eight Final Four in one site?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're having those conversations. And I think, we've looked at what the men have done when they've had the joint championship. And I do think that we're going to make some changes to the format.
I love it. Great to hear. Breaking news. Let's throw the big banner up. Got it. One of those things about that second weekend we have talked a little ad nauseum, because we've also talked off air quite a bit, is this idea that maybe we could have a dual host. And again, there aren't a lot of options here, so this may be an absolute moot point. And the dual host has technically been said can't happen. You can't have men's and women's championship weekend of any part of the rounds in the same site at the same time, because not everybody can do it. Not everybody has the facilities, et cetera. But you both have said, listen, we're looking into it. We're going to at least see. It could only happen on a Saturday, to note, because Friday games, men's games with a double set of women's games is just too much. Where's the latest on that? Are you still working on it? Has it just come to a dead end and realized it just can't happen? Where are we with that? I guess, Kristen, I'll start with you, because really it impacts you all, I would say, more than it impacts the men.
Cam and I have decided we're just going to arm wrestle for it if it comes up, and just, that's our solution.
Okay, great. Can I get a webcam on this, please?
Absolutely. In all seriousness, I think this is where it's great working with Cam as chair of the men's committee. We have not made a decision. And I think mostly we're really trying to do our due diligence and not just try to make a decision based on assumptions, but try to get some facts. So like we had a meeting with both committees last week and talked about what some scheduling options could be. And we've had a couple of meetings since then to really dig in and say, like, what would this actually mean for the host? Could they do it? Do they have the capacity? Do they have the facilities? And I think we're trying to get some of that data back before we really land somewhere. And I think all of us are on the same page about not wanting this to impact either gender's experience, right? These are incredibly important games. These coaches and players have worked incredibly hard to make it to this point. And so we are really trying to preserve that experience. And I think if we reach a point where it feels like it could be an issue, maybe the answer will be no. But I think if we can make it happen, then maybe the answer is yes. But I think we have some more data to collect.
And again, Championships Committee probably will have the ultimate say on this, right? They usually like to have at least the final say in terms of equity across all sports. So I assume you can make a decision, but Champs Committee is probably going to either sign off or say no.
To be honest, the sense I'm getting is that I think it's our decision. I don't know, Kim, if you've had a different sense, but I think it's our decision is what I've been hearing.
Well, we're getting a nod.
Yeah,
from Kim.
I mean, I think. Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Chris. And I'm nodding because I agree with everything she said. I mean, I think that's one thing Chris and I have talked a lot about. This isn't a men's, women's issue. It's what's best for the tournament, knowing that in 2 years, the women will have a joint championship as well. So we feel like, as we've been working with our friends at the NCAA, this is a sport committee decision that, again, knowing it's a unique situation with being a joint championship year, that this is something that we can make jointly.
When it comes to choosing hosts, obviously there's a mileage thing, and it has to do with paperwork. You got to get your paperwork in. The deadline's end of business on Friday. If you're watching this on Friday and you haven't done your paperwork, hurry up. Your deadline is the 20th of February. Cam, when it comes to choosing the host, obviously you want to go with who deserves it in terms of seating, and you want to go with who's going to work if you have to make a geography question. But if ultimately you have to make some other decisions or you have to talk to them, what kind of conversations are you having with hosts about making sure that experience is both great for the student athletes and the teams, the fans who show up, but also those who are watching from home?
Well, if you are listening to the show right now and you have not put your paperwork in, you actually only have a few hours because the deadline is today. So
it's today
your paperwork
now.
In.
Well, you better get it in.
Men. So actually, to be honest, though, Dave, over the last 72 hours in our racks have been extremely helpful in this. We've been working with schools that, could host, right? So we've been having those conversations, certainly the month of February, but especially this week, saying, hey, deadline's coming up on Thursday. Where are you at with your paperwork? So that's been really helpful, just having a pulse on, will schools submit? Will they not submit? And then what's really helpful for Chris and I is going obviously in the next week when we're really starting to build the plane, we know who's locked in. We're not guessing, hey, is this school going to bid because they haven't put in a bid yet? We know going into this weekend what those are going to look like from a host standpoint in terms of who's put their paperwork in.
And we should point out, you put your paperwork in now for the entire event. It's not like you win that first weekend and suddenly you throw your paperwork in for the second weekend. It's now or never.
That's correct. The bid deadline for today is both first weekend and second weekend.
And Kristen, when it comes down to the same idea, what's important for you all in terms of what that host can provide? And do you have conversations with them once they're chosen, even of saying, listen, this is what we feel is important. Please make sure to focus on that, or anything along those lines?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think anything that you ask of a host is like rocket science, but I think there's a lot of like little details that you really have to pay attention to. So, we'll meet with all of the hosts. We'll have conversations with them about everything from what the practice times need to be to what's expected in terms of locker room space and tickets for fans. I mean, there's just a lot of little pieces to it. But again, it all contributes to like either giving teams an average or an above average experience. And, this should really feel really special in terms of their overall experience for a season. So we'll talk with the hosts a lot and try to give them a lot of like templates that helps keep people organized and navigating all the moving parts. The fortunate thing is a lot of times you're going back to a place who's done it a few years in a row, so they're pretty well seasoned in it. And that's always helpful. And, when you start to get site reps assigned and it's site reps who have done it in the past, they're also extremely helpful in terms of making sure that a place is doing what they're supposed to do.
By the way, I got to ask, because I got to ask, do either of you already see scenarios where people have flat out said, listen, we can't host for X reason? Sometimes they rent their facilities out. The reasons are aplenty over the years that I've been doing this that you already know, and you don't have to name them. I'm just simply saying, do we already know of scenarios where you guys have teams that are in a hosting position that may not host because it's just not going to happen.
I think there's always going to be those situations. In a perfect world, every single team that's in the tournament would put into host, especially for us in that second weekend, because anything could happen in the first weekend, right? So, but I think there's always going to be schools that, for whatever reasons, whether it's their gym capacity, whether it's their ability to host, whether it's that gymnastics conference in their city that takes up all the hotels. But I'd say from our side, there's nothing glaring. However, I just think that second weekend, you just never know what those two matchups are going to be.
Kristen, anything to add to that?
I mean, and no, it's pretty similar. I mean, there's definitely some schools that have indicated that they would not be able to host that second weekend, for a variety of reasons. And in some ways, that's really helpful to know up front, right? Because things happen quickly. You get that first and second round games done, and then it's like quick decisions about where you're sending teams. So having that information ahead of time is really helpful in terms of planning. And, knock on wood, there hasn't been an issue finding hosts for those sectional rounds. So,
by the way, Cam, the gymnastics taking all the hotels, that feels like maybe you're still seeing somebody about that. That feels personal. That feels a little on the nose.
I actually just said that as an example. There was no underlining comment on where that came from. So you know what? It could be a youth basketball convention. It could be anything.
It felt like maybe you had experienced something along those lines somewhere. That's just brilliant. You brought up site reps, Chris. And one of the things I definitely wanted to talk about was site reps, because I feel like on both genders, there's times where you send site reps. They are terrific. They keep things on point, where they're consistent across the board with whatever is needing of consistency. But every once in a while, it's because a site rep was called last minute or something happened or whatever the case may be, that we get a host site that doesn't execute. And by the way, I am talking across a number of sports. I'm not trying to just pick on a basketball scenario here, but we have it where the site rep doesn't pay attention to something or isn't knowledgeable about whatever is needed of knowledge. How do you guys go about picking the site reps and making sure they do understand cover to cover the site responsibilities and what they're going to oversee, Kristen?
Yeah, I think we've tightened that up a lot on the women's side over the last couple of years. We had a site rep call today with anyone who could potentially be asked to go somewhere to start to go over a lot of these details. I think we've done a lot in terms of the site rep manual. We've added a lot of templates, again, to kind of support them. And I think we've done a better job really defining what we expect of the site rep and what their role is. And I think that was a little fuzzy in the past. So I think that when you give people the appropriate support and training, then they do a really good job. And I think we've been fortunate to have some great coaches and administrators who have run sites. And I've seen a huge improvement just over the last few years.
Cam, your thoughts on it?
As we've thought about just the evolution of the racks, I mean, that's been, one thing, especially last year, that, we told our racks from the very first call, hey, we want to ensure that if you have a team that's not in the NCAA tournament, expect to be a site rep. So we've really tried to, I would say, kind of nurture our site reps from within, have those conversations early on. So come selection Sunday, and, I think of my region, if there's a school within a few hour drive, like I'm calling my rack member to say, hey, are you able to be there? Because you have that date held, right? And they're like, yep, I'm in. So I think that's how we've really tried to, one of the ways we've really tried to, I would say, just enhance the rack experience. But then there's always just gonna be people we have in our back pocket, people that have been doing site repping for us for a lot of years, maybe former committee members. So that's where, we think of our big board in the room, we have the bracket, we have, Jim Haney's thinking about the officials. And then we have another board that's just the site reps of, hey, here's maybe the 20 places we could be. Who are the 20 people we know in these locations? And then, like Kristen said, just having that kind of playbook in place, so there's no surprises. So they know exactly what to do when they get there. And it's not I think it's just a leadership thing, right? The more tools you give someone, the more successful they're going to be. So that's really what we try to do with our site reps as well.
And I hate to ask, do you guys go through those scenarios of the what ifs? What if you got crowd disruption, or what if you have this? What if you have a power outage? Like, do you go through those what ifs with everybody?
Well, I think it's even by facility. I mean, we see some as we're watching conference championship games. It's like, ooh, let's take a look at that student section. They're getting a little close to the court. if they're hosting, we got to make sure that front row is empty. So, I mean, we're actually doing some advanced scouting while we're watching games that weekend as well. So I would say definitely the bigger issues that are overarching, but then specific to the facilities based on what we're seeing in the lead up as well.
Speaking of which, we should probably talk about just some responsibilities. A lot of times committee members are pulled off of these conversations in terms of bracketing and work and all that when they're involved with the tournament. And Kristen, we joked a little bit about one of your members is NYU head coach Meg Barber, among others. I'm assuming that will still be in place, but Kristen, to follow up on that, you're also athletics director at Smith, and Lynn Hersey refuses to lose more than once a year, and so she's always in these conversations. So will you still participate in some facet of these things, or will the liaison try and keep you or others from being involved?
Well, Coach Hersey has given me the easiest committee responsibility ever because I have yet to sit in a bracketing call. I get kicked off for a few hours and then I get pulled back on. So, I thank you, Lynn. And the same I'm hoping will happen this year. So, we've got plans in place. We have a vice chair, and she would certainly step up and sit in sort of the chair role. And I would not be on the call. And I think, it makes sense, right? It's bad optics if your chair has teams in it, and that's been a pretty consistent policy for us on our committee.
Apparently, for FBS, it's no big deal. They like to have people with conflicting opinions all the time making their decisions. I'm personally, and I've said this many times, I'm of the opinion that we're all professionals, and if really that started to show up and was become a problem, then it would be handled on an individual basis. I don't think we have major issues, at least in the sport of basketball. I hate seeing committees hamstrung, but Kristen, you could lose half this committee?
Yeah, we could. We could become a pretty cozy group pretty quickly.
Well, I think one year, I think it was still when we had 8, not 10. I think it was down to 2 people who are both rookies trying to do the entire bracketing, because will you bring others in? Will there be somebody else from those racks who maybe can step in and be of assistance?
Yeah, my understanding from the past years when it got really low in numbers is they brought past committee members in to help with the bracketing. And I think we would certainly do that again if we needed to. I don't think we're going to get quite to that point this year, but we could definitely be losing a significant number of members for that conversation.
Cam, it doesn't seem as significant on your end, but obviously upsets happen.
Yeah, I think that's why your leadership group is so important. So we have 2 vice chairs, Coach Gorski and Coach Boothie, that they could be in their championship game and they could be out as well. But we do have a structure in place to kind of ensure that if I have to step out, or if anyone in our committee has to step out. But I think that's also why we've talked about this a lot, is why we have so much conversation the month of February before selections even happen. So we are aligned as a committee, not saying it's a St. Norbert specific issue, but it's just more of, hey, if this were to happen, how are we going to discuss this as a group? So come selection weekend, insert whatever school you want, we should have those issues already vetted out so we can build a bracket appropriately.
Got one random fan question. They said NPI has a quality win with win bonus, but all losses hurt. Does this discourage teams from agreeing to play traditional powers? You're both athletic directors. I'd love to get your perspective. I know there's still maybe not enough data on this, but I haven't sensed that this weight that the men have or anything else that is involved in the NPI numbers necessarily tells everybody not to play some of the good teams out there, even if you are going to take a loss, Cam.
That's where we really looked at the weight of, if you win a non-conference game and it's against a quality opponent, you're going to get rewarded. So, that's something that I think if you look at, again, we're only not even 2 years into this, but I think that was something we talked about the last time we visited you with Dave. I'm happy that we didn't make knee-jerk reactions after the first year. We said, let's see this through for 2 years, and then let's get 2 years of data. The one thing that we had the advantage of as we were building the dials is we were also able to play with the prior year data. So in some cases, we kind of have like 2+ years of data because we were able to use 3 years ago as data as we were making our dials. So I think that's, again, one thing that I'm happy with is it's very easy to say, let's tweak this and let's tweak that. And then coaches are like, how do we schedule it? Because every year you guys are changing the dials on us. So I'm hopeful moving forward. I know this upcoming year we can make tweaks, but I do hope that we get into a cadence that it's not every year, depending on the committee members, depends on what the NPI is. And then it becomes a hard conversation of just, to that question, well, that might work this year, but what about in 2 years or in a year if you have an opponent you've already scheduled? I've already had coaches reach out to me across the country saying, hey, Cam, our dial's changing next year because I'm making my schedule. And I'm sure that's happening. Every coach is thinking that. So that's where I'm hopeful, just as an enterprise, we really try to stay somewhat true to the dials, knowing that, yes, every so often you're going to try to tweak them, but hopefully they won't be big wholesale changes.
Kristen, same question. Is there something wrong with? I mean, I'm kind of glad we're balancing the losses, but interesting enough, Oshkosh has 2 losses, sitting as number 1. Other than Lynn Hersey and GP Gramacki getting some type of home and home set, anything that you're thinking of in terms of scheduling and how you see teams scheduling based on this NPI stuff?
Well, I think in the second year, coaches are starting to get a better understanding of what NPI actually looks like and means, and then they're actually now having a chance to have it impact their scheduling. I think at the end of the day, coaches need to be trying to have as strong of a schedule as possible, and you need to go and win those games. Like that those pieces are never going to change. Again, I said this earlier on the show that I do think we're going to look at our quality win number. But I think that we like to reward a strong strength of schedule. And so playing those teams, whether they're in your region or out of region that are strong, are going to help you. And I don't think we're going to be changing anything on the dial so dramatically that you'll see a massive shift in that approach.
Finally, for those fans who see their teams either outside the top 4 on the women's side or outside the top 8 on the men's side, that's so key. How do you, what faith do you give them that maybe, all's not lost, you still might get that hosting chance, Kristen?
Well, I think, there is a lot that can really change in the next 10 days. I think a lot can change a week from Sunday from 6 p.m. to midnight. So, I don't think you ever count yourself out until someone formally tells you. That's always been my philosophy. But you gotta do your job and win your conference games and finish strong. And there's definitely a lot of things. Even just last night's games, honestly, shifted a few things already. So a lot of numbers can shift. And then you add in all the other factors around geography and who's put in to host. And there's a lot of reasons why you could end up on the good side of this.
Cam, I meant to ask you this earlier. How do you hope to bracket with the Elite 8 being in one site with the teams in essentially 1 through 8? Are you going to try and line them up that they're not, they're a traditional 1 through 8 scenario?
Yeah, I think that would be, as you think about, again, the perfect scenario. If that is how the results hold out, that's the one thing of knowing that we're bringing all 8 teams to one kind of, for lack of a better term, neutral site in Fort Wayne. So I know you asked me some follow-up questions when I mentioned the 3rd round advantage that could play out. I think that's also where the Fort Wayne, we have somewhat an advantage. Now, again, is that going to lead to the perfect bracket? I don't know, because there could be facility hosting, there could be geographic restrictions, but I think having that 3rd round standalone and then having neutral site from the Elite 8 on, I think could help us. Is it going to be perfect? Well, nothing's perfect in life, but I think it's going to lead to us maybe having some better situations than maybe in prior years, just because of some of those opportunities that we're going to have that you only have once every 4 or 5 years with the joint years.
Yeah, I like that. Well, you guys have given us a lot of your time. I very much appreciate it. I know we'll talk again in about 10 days' time. Kristen, before I let you go, though, great question just came in. I should have asked a long time ago. We should point out that you used to coach in Division III at Case Western before you got, well, you lost your mind. You went to D1, but we're not trying to hold that against you. Obviously, a lot has changed, but I'm very curious from your perspective. Anything that has changed that you think has been a major plus or has been significant or whatever from that point till now?
Yeah, so much, right? Just the elevation of the women's game, how popular it is, the level of play. I think it's incredible. And you look at, I obviously have a bird's eye view to what our coaching staff does in terms of scouting and preparing and analytics. It is a different world. And I think the opportunity and the experience that we give our student athletes is incredible. I think it's really rare, and just really kind of exciting to be a part of it. So I think a ton has changed. What has not changed, though, is everybody wants to compete and everybody wants to win. And that's the fun part. And that's always like at the core of it. Right. So, but certainly I've seen nothing but honestly, like wonderful things in terms of the growth of this sport.
And we both know the tournaments have changed quite a bit too.
Yeah.
Not just the 8 teams from your region get in and play through each other to get out. That's D2 style. Speaking of that, Cam and Kristen, you guys gotten any calls from D2 about the way they're trying to change things and evolve and what they want to do if they're trying to emulate anything here in D3?
I have a lot of friends in Division II, but the phone's not ringing to say, hey, what are you guys doing there? But, I think that's one thing that I've enjoyed about being at St. Norbert College is just how collaborative the membership is. So getting to know people through the committee, spent time prior to St. Norbert in a conference office. And I think the one thing that I've learned very early is there are no trade secrets. It's more about what are some ideas that we can use, borrow. If it's going to better the division, let's do it. So I think that's something that we've always tried to do at St. Norbert. I've tried to do here on the basketball committee is use the resources we have and hopefully try to put the best product forward.
Well, you two, again, plenty of time. I really appreciate it. We'll give you guys the final word before we sign off. So, but thank you very much for your time. And with that, Cam, any final thoughts you want to share with those who are tuned in?
Look forward to the next week and change here. Buckle up. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think this is the hard work that the committee, from a men's and women's basketball standpoint, we work a lot, and that's really where it's all going to culminate here over the next few weeks, obviously with the selections coming up, but then the tournament and trying to put the best bracket possible, try to put the best experience for our student athletes possible. Division III is very healthy. So hopefully for those of you, I know if you're listening to the show, you're going to tune in, but tell a friend, watch some of the men's, women's basketball tournaments. It's great basketball. So thanks to you, Dave, and to all those that cover D3 hoops. Yeah, no, well said. They're going to be great games. We've already seen some terrific ones. Kristen, any final thoughts?
Well, Kelly Whitaker actually from the NCAA always says this, that, the madness begins with Division III, and she's right. I think it's an incredibly exciting time. Programs are building to have this experience. And I know that a lot of schools across the country are going to work really, really hard to make these kids feel special when they're hosting them. So for anyone who's listening to the show, just tune in, go to a game, go buy a ticket, go support these coaches and these student athletes because they are well worth every minute. And a big thank you to you, Dave, for, again, promoting the sport and promoting Division III. I think we need a lot more of it. And I think there's just some great stories here. So thanks for having us on tonight.
Well, thank you for your time. Means a lot. Look forward to catching up with you down the road. Now go get some sleep because you're not going to get much of it in the next several weeks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Kristen and Cam joining us here on the Hoopsville Hotline again to talk about everything that is committee related. I hope you learned a lot from that. Great conversation with them. We'll learn more from them as time goes on. We'll get more from the regional rankings and not regional rankings, apologies, but the MPI and all that. And of course, bracketing is 10 days away. So we'll have them on that selection show to talk about some of the decisions that they have to make. And then we'll hear from them about the bracketing on our brackets breakdown as well. We'll take a break. When we come back, we will dive in on the data. Scott Peterson, Matt Snyder have some great ideas and teams and conferences and all kinds of stuff that you need to pay attention to in the next 10 days. Because as last night showed us, one night can change it all. One result can change everybody's fortunes in the top 16 and elsewhere. You're listening to Hoopsville, the top 16 show, presented by D3Hoops.com. Back with more after this.
For the love of the game. But for those of us who are Division III student athletes, it's more than that. A lot more.
Sure, the game is important. But as we work so hard to build both mind and body, it's more about team.
That is why NCAA Division III teamed up with Special Olympics. And in giving the gift of sport to those for whom it seemed an impossible dream, we are working to make this a better world.
Help us keep that dream alive.
You can make a difference.
We are the coaches of women's basketball. We are leaders and teachers, dreamers and winners. We are professionals who conduct ourselves ethically and with integrity. We place the education, safety, and well-being of the athletes we coach above all else and teach them the fundamental values they need to succeed in life. We are coaches united for the good of our game and those who play it. We are the WBCA.
We've got more schools than Division I, more fans than Division II, and more upsets than March Madness. There's nearly 850 programs with over 11,000 games leading to 2 national championships. And we've been covering it all for over 2 decades. From Eastern to Occidental, from Puget Sound to Piedmont, from Southwestern to the University of New England, and from Hope to Calvin. Nobody covers Division III basketball like we do. We're d3hoops.com at www.d3hoops.com. The National Association of Basketball Coaches is the nation's premier professional development and advocacy organization for basketball coaches at every level. The NABC strives to serve as the voice for coaches on national issues while advancing the core value of leadership, service, advocacy, education, and inclusion. To learn more about the NABC and to become a member, visit nabc.com and follow the NABC on social media at NABC1927. That's nabc.com or NABC1927 on social media.
Responsibility is being accountable for your words and actions, first and foremost. It also is an obligation to be a positive influence in the communities around you. Being in a D3 program, you're going to have lots of different opportunities. You're not just an athlete, you're also involved in student life. Your academics are extremely important. We give a lot of our student athletes responsibilities right from the start by giving them leadership opportunities, by having them engage in the community, be a positive influence. That's being a responsible person.
There are over 480,000 college athletes. Only 2% would go pro. That means over 470,000 will not get a shoe contract. No autographs. No private jets. No fan clubs. No Hall of Fame inductions. Instead, they will walk away with something much more valuable.
I did receive a non-athletic scholarship upon entering school.
I got the presidential scholarship, which was huge for me.
I think there's more opportunities for academic scholarships in Division III.
I did receive academic scholarships. Just being involved on campus, being a leader, all those things combined kind of get me recognized. It's a great experience for me.
Welcome back, everybody, as we continue on the Top 16 show. This is where we already rolled up our sleeves with the committee chairs. Now we kind of rub our hands in the dirt and get ready to have some fun with it. We get to talk about, hey, yeah, the brackets could start right now with this information, but we got 10 days, and as the last day or two have already shown us, anything's possible. And so we're going to talk about where the top 16s could change, where could change in the top 4 and 8. Where you should be watching out for bid thieves if you don't want to see your bubble pop or you want to see your conference get as many teams in as possible, and some of the more fascinating conference races along the way. Joining us to break it all down will be our friends they're the data guys. That's the best way I got to describe them because they just know everything data, including one who isn't on the air. But joining us, it is Matt Snyder from D3 DataCast, and it's Scott Peterson from the D3 Lab. These guys will know more about data than I could ever imagine, and I thought I was a data head growing up. Matt, first and foremost, we'll talk to you about the men and dive in now, but just your general blush thoughts on the NPI, where things stand as of now, etc.
I think we have a lot more comfort level now in year 2, just knowing how this is going to evolve now over the next couple of weeks. I think the committee, Cam seems very comfortable with their process now in year 2 for them and how they're going to take the NPI numbers and put it into a bracket. So last year, we didn't know how any of this was really going to go on. This year, I think we feel much more comfortable with the happenings of NPI.
Scott, your thoughts, same thing, especially maybe something you heard, but anything you think of in terms of where things stand with 10 days left to go in the season with all this data?
My thoughts are mostly the same, that I think everyone has a much higher level of comfort with NPI and what certain results can do to your NPI. And I know looking at my own numbers, the array of numbers, it feels like I'm surprised by the level of certainty I have over a lot of the NPI picture. It can still change, of course, but I think an extra year of understanding it just lets you know what sort of moves are possible and what sort of moves are not possible with the games remaining.
I am throwing you to a curveball right now. I did not warn you this was coming, but it is a question I got from somebody who is a little bit biased because they want their team into the top 4, and they're not there right now. They said, do you believe the NPIs more accurately reflects the strength than its adjusted efficiency margin? And if not, why are we seeding by NPI rather than adjusted efficiency margin? And this is where the airplane goes right past the control tower in my head. And I turn to you two fine gentlemen and go, sirs?
To me, they're trying to do two different things. The NPI is trying to judge a team's resume, the quality of their wins and losses, and maybe the deservability of them to pursue a championship. The adjusted efficiency margins is trying to adjust the team strength. How good are the teams? Now, mostly those two things line up, but they're not always the exact same things. A really good team might lose too many close games, even though they're good, and their resume might not be as good. So I think that's just important to keep in mind. They're measuring two different things kind of intentionally, I think. NPI is more of a resume metric. Something like efficiency margin is more of a team strength metric.
Scott, anything to add?
No, Matt and I have had a lot of discussions about this, about, what do we want to reward as far as NC tournament selection? If we know that we know that NYU and Scranton are probably the most dominant women's teams right now. But they are not 1 and 2 in NPI. Does that mean that NPI is bad? And I think we both agree, doesn't mean we're right, but we both agree that it's not bad, because NPI is kind of a resume stat, kind of like the old system was also a resume stat, where it says, hey, like, what are your results this year? And we don't need to get down to the nitty-gritty of you lost 1 game in double overtime by 1 point. It is still a loss on your resume, and I think that we do want that to count for something. Whereas in an adjusted efficiency world, that would almost be a wash, and especially if you were playing a strong team, it might even be a pro, which, if you're trying to understand the underlying abilities and strength of a basketball team, is amazing. But when you're trying to say who is the most deserving to get into the NCAA tournament, I do think you want those wins and losses to have weight.
Great answer. Thank you, both of you. You kind of answered the rest of that. The only follow-up to that would be, this person thinks the NPI favors power conferences. I think the data is way too early to determine that, because I think we've seen two different results in the last 2 years, Scott.
Well, I think one thing NPI does really well is it matches up a result with the strength of your opponent. And if you are in a power conference, it means that you have the ability to have a really high NPI, but also the ability to have a really low NPI if you lose a bunch of games. Your range of NPI outcome is much wider. If you play in a weaker conference, the range of your outcomes is much smaller. And so and I think what we're seeing, if a lot of teams from a power conference get into the tournament, it means they're at the higher end of that range of outcomes because they won a bunch of games against really tough opponents. I think the NESCAC on the women's side got 5 teams in last year. They might get 2 in this year. And
right.
Like, just because you're in a power conference doesn't give you the largest, like, there are advantages that you have, but it's not this automatic thing that's biased towards you. You have to go capitalize on the opportunities that are presented to you. Some teams do it and some teams don't. And I don't think that I think if you're seeing a lot of teams from power conferences it's because they're power conferences. They're better basketball teams. They win more against better opponents.
Well said. And we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for answering that, Scott. We'll give you a little bit of a break, and we'll head over to Matt to talk men's basketball. We'll have you back on the women's side here shortly. Matt, thank you for humoring me with that. Let's talk on this men's side with the top 16 and top 8. We'll bring that data back up here in just a smidge. But in the general sense of things, this top 16, this top 8, this top 4, overall seems pretty good. But I'm going to get this out of the way now. As we saw with Montclair last night, you take a loss, things are going to change for some of them very quickly.
Yeah, and they were a team we were going to talk about as potentially being in that top 4, but that loss suddenly kind of takes them out of contention. And they're a team that has struggled with the strength of schedule aspects. So they were having difficulty just getting into that kind of top 8, top 4 position anyway. So one loss is huge for them. And right, we saw it making a big difference for them now kind of falling out of that position. I think where are they sitting 10 right now? So that's a big loss for them. I think there's maybe still potential for them to climb up. But again, even sitting with just one defeat, that's a lot right now.
We're going to look at the top 8 here and again as a reminder, and then we'll flip over to the top 16 as you talk. Who do you think is safe in the 4, the 8, the 16, however you want to put it? Who do you think is safe?
Yeah, well, let's first start off at the top 4. I think Emory, Trinity, Connecticut, Randolph-Macon, not locks, but they all look really good. I think they all look pretty safe to kind of be in that top 4 position. Right now, Chicago's kind of maybe 50-50 to stay in there. St. Thomas, Texas, Mary Washington, all poised to maybe make a jump if Chicago stumbles. Chicago still has tough UAA games to play, so a loss could make a big difference there. And I'll jump right into maybe the top 8 as well. I think those teams I mentioned above all look really good for the top 8, those 7 teams. Christopher Newport right now is 8. I don't think that they're maybe going to stay there necessarily. So I think for the top 8, we're looking at Emory, Trinity, Connecticut, Randolph-Macon, Chicago, St. Thomas, Texas, Mary Washington, and then probably Tufts are all probably 75% or better to stay in that top 8.
Hey, well, I got the top 8 right in front of me. It's an easy one to mention. Can you give everybody a sense? I've known this to be true, but Emory's almost a full point ahead of Trinity. Trinity's about 3/4 of a point of NPI ahead of Randolph-Macon, who is essentially 1/10 of a point ahead of U Chicago. The 1/10 of a point, is that jumpable? Is a full point jumpable, or is a point pretty large margin?
I think so. Going back to maybe that power conference discussion we had, it's all about the opportunity that you have to collect good enough wins. So a team like Trinity, Connecticut in the NESCAC, they still have good wins in front of them potentially, even though it's only the conference tournament left. Chicago finishing up their UAA slate, they still have tough games in front of them. They still have to play Wash U. If I'm remembering correctly, they play Brandeis and NYU as well. So a lot of opportunities to gain those NPI points. So I think some of those margins are jumpable. It just depends on are the teams ahead of you winning as well, or are they maybe taking a loss in there?
And you've hit this. You think there's some teams that can, well, top 4 wise, because obviously this could be pretty important in a few ways. Chicago's only got 0.7 ahead of St. Thomas here. St. Thomas has got a conference tournament. Chicago doesn't. Could we see a switch here?
I think so. And it's really up to, how Chicago going to do. If they maybe 2-3 or better in their final 3 UAA games, because they still have 3 regular season games, that might be good enough. Certainly 3-0 Chicago is in the top 4. If they only win one of those tough games, then I think you're definitely looking at someone like St. Thomas, Texas, or maybe Mary Washington, depending on what they do in their conference tournaments as well, being able to jump into those spots, fairly easily.
By the way, we should again remind anybody that we've been told U Chicago might be without Eamon Kana for the rest of the regular season. So holding on to top 4 may have to be done without one of their best players. A dark horse, you mentioned Tufts relatively safe in the 7. Can they make a leap? That seems like a lot of points.
Yeah, I think we're talking maybe 10% or something like this. But again, NESCAC, if they win that conference tournament, that's going to be several quality wins. If Chicago can't go through that UAA gauntlet unscathed, a team like Tufts could make that jump from 7 all the way up to the top 4. I think beyond 7, we're probably not looking at teams that are very likely at all. Only slim chances for someone beyond that to maybe jump into the top 4 at this point.
So there's the top 8. I'm moving on to the top 16. We now see them on our screen: Wesleyan, Montclair, Endicott, Illinois Wesleyan, Mount Union, Gustavus, Hood, and Redlands. Any of these teams that could jump into that 8 that suddenly are now going to be in a hosting position for that second weekend?
I think really good I mean, decent chances here would be Wesleyan, Montclair State, and Endicott. I think they're all poised to jump in. And I think maybe the team that could slide out would be Christopher Newport there. Christopher Newport, they're not really going to have many opportunities to jump into that, to gain NPI points with really quality wins outside of maybe a rematch with Mary Washington in that coast-to-coast tournament. And that's a really tough game. If Christopher Newport could win that rematch, I think that would solidify for them. But that's really their only one opportunity left to gain a lot of NPI. If they don't win that game, they're out. And one of those next teams is jumping in: Wesleyan, Montclair State, Endicott. Different dynamics there. Wesleyan and Montclair State will be big favorite. Montclair State and Endicott will be big favorites in their conference tournaments. Wesleyan has that NESCAC gauntlet to contend with, but maybe one of those teams would be maybe more likely even than Christopher Newport at this point to stay in the top 8.
When we look at this top 16, my eyes drift to the bottom, honestly, and I'm looking at Gustavus, Hood, and Redlands. Talk about 3 wildly different teams. Redlands probably moved in here with the win over CMS last night. But that makes me think, too, geez, Redlands have been inconsistent. They could be out. Anybody else that could be out of this top 16?
Yeah, I think Hood is looking a little bit on the edge right now. They're both in good shape, obviously in the top 16 now, but I think Hood probably needs to at least get to the MAC Commonwealth final to have a good shot. But maybe more likely than that, win the MAC Commonwealth to feel really good about staying in the top 16. Like, they're going to have maybe York, Pennsylvania to contend with if they're having a good year. So that could be difficult for Hood. But if they win that, I think they're good to stay in. And yeah, Redlands and Claremont Mudd Scripps, it seems like they're on a collision course once again. They just kind of switched spots in the rankings the last couple of days with that win. Are they going to meet again? Is the winner automatically top 8? I'm not sure. They would be in a good position. I think the loser of a potential rematch of those 2 SCIAC teams is definitely out of the top 16.
Coming back on Cam at this point to talk about, okay, there's our top 16, but we've got 10 days. And as we've already seen, things change. What teams, what fan bases should at least be happy or be focused on the fact that their teams could enter this conversation, maybe end up in hosting opportunities that opening weekend as a result?
Yeah, when I run data, my computer still likes Catholic's chances quite a bit. They were down at number 22, so kind of significantly away from the top 16 right now. They do have a game against Scranton remaining at the end of the regular season. That's a tough game, but a chance for them to gain NPI points. If they can do that, and then if they would be maybe the favorite in the landmark tournament, if they could win that, they could see potential opportunities to jump in NPI. I think they could get into the top 16, even at number 22. Another team, NYU, we've mentioned UAA schedules several times. They play a bunch of good teams. If they keep winning, I know those are all tough games, but if NYU beats Chicago, Wash U, Brandeis, those are their final 3 games. If they win them all, I think they're definitely in this mix as well. We mentioned the SCIAC dynamic there with Claremont Mudd Scripps. I think there's a chance that they jump in if they win that tournament. And then I think the WIAC, that's always a big thing hanging out there. That is just a meat grinder of a conference tournament. There's 5 or 6 even teams. It's anyone's race. But if like someone like Stevens Point, Whitewater, or La Crosse win that tournament, those are probably 2 or 3 good wins, good quality wins that you're putting on your resume. That could be enough to jump one of those teams into the top 16. And then a couple of dark horses here. We're maybe stretching things. Wash U. They're another team that has opportunities to gain a bunch of wins. They've taken a ton of losses, but if they get 3 really good wins to close the season, maybe they could be a top 16. And then out of the Centennial Conference, Franklin and Marshall, maybe there's a chance here if they win the Centennial Tournament.
Which is even wilder to me.
That's going to be a tough one, right? There's a lot of Johns Hopkins, Gettysburg, really tough. But if they can get those good wins along the way, maybe someone else takes a loss. Maybe Franklin and Marshall still has possibility to get into the top 16.
That's fascinating. Of course, they hosted last year basically for NYU, who couldn't host the opening weekend. All right, hey, we talked with the committee chairs about island issues, and Cam brought up an idea of a Texas pod. He brought up the idea of a SCIAC pod. In general, from your data perspective and looking at teams and all of that, what were your thoughts on those 2 things?
I think a Texas pod is really, really likely at this point, especially with Trinity, Texas, now in the SAA instead of being in the SCAC where they were. That takes that conference dynamic maybe out of play. So if Trinity, Texas wins the SAA, or they're probably in at large anyway, St. Thomas, You get the ASC champ. That's 3 out of 4 teams. And just the way it looks like the NPI seeding is falling, that would be a pretty fairly seeded pod as well. And then you could kind of fly in any team from around the country to fill out that bottom rung of that pod, kind of the 4 seed and that foursome there. And that kind of works out. You'd represent at that point probably 3 different regions with 4 different conferences. That would be a pretty decent pod. So I would call that like a lock at this point to happen, that we're going to see a Texas pod with kind of that dynamic there.
Interesting. Emory's always a wild card. They're number 1 in the in this ranking. If they stay there, we'll see. But they're number 1. That means essentially they should host. But as you and I both know, and those in Division III know very well, there's not a lot of options there. How do you see that Emory geography working?
Yeah, just not a lot of D3 density, right, in the Atlanta area, even within 500 miles. I think we're pretty good, though, this year. The USA South champion, maybe that's Pfeiffer right now. I think they're in the lead, that they could get to Emory within 500 miles. So that would be a first-round matchup. And then you're maybe looking at 2 of Maryville, Roanoke, and Rhodes. If 2 of those 3 get into the tournament, then that's probably filling out the Emory pod, or at least has the ability to do that. Depending on what the committee does with the West Coast scenario, they could take a team like Whitworth. If they're not flying down to Southern California, they could go from the Pacific Northwest down to Atlanta and maybe fill out that pod as well. So I think we have kind of 3 or 4 different options. So I think Emory's good. There are some years it's just kind of barren in the geography around there, and you have to think about maybe Emory can't host. They're absolutely deserving this year, and it really does look like the committee's going to have decent options to make that work.
Coincidentally, 2020, Emory hosted that opening weekend. One of the SkyX, who was it? Was it Claremont Mud Scripps or was it Pomona? Which one of them went out there, knocked off the Eagles in the second round to get to the next weekend? So they've flown them from West Coast to Atlanta before. You mentioned a bunch of WIACs a moment ago about possibility of maybe entering the top 16, and my head is starting to hurt. Great. We get a lot of WIACs in. Great. We get a lot of NESCACs in. We talked about this, but man, from a hosting perspective, that's not ideal.
Yeah, if they're trying to separate the conferences so they're not meeting in that potential second round, if you get 5 teams from the WIAC, that's a lot of moving around you have to do. I think we're only likely to get 4, but I think 5's in play still. You run out of places to put them. There's a potential. One thing I've run into in my mock bracket, because I'm a nerd, I like to make my own mock brackets. You get into a scenario where you want to try to pair a WIAC team with maybe someone like Mount Union, but they're all above 500 miles. So you have to look at places in between. Do you move a pod to even John Carroll is close enough to get a UW Whitewater in? Do you move it to Aurora? Something like that could be in play. I think 5 WIACs really does throw a wrench into the geography. 4 is really easy to handle. 5 could get a little messy, and they might have to get creative there.
Playing a little scary sound bite in the background to see if maybe that works. Hey, we talk about places to watch for games that could be pretty good, or places that will have some impact on things. And we'll talk about Bid Thieves in just a moment here. But is there one place you've got your eye on? We talked about the WIAC and, could have as many as 4 or 5, but that feels tame. Give me a place to watch this week or week and a half ahead that really could be a roller coaster.
I've been really interesting to see what's happening in the ODAC the last several weeks. That's one of those power conferences that's used to getting lots of teams into the tournament. I think there's scenarios in play where they only get 1 team in. I think maybe still 3 is in play. Last night we had Virginia Wesleyan and Randolph-Macon square off. Randolph-Macon won that, which kind of puts Virginia Wesleyan's tournament chances on life support. Roanoke's trying to hang in there. They look like maybe one of the most bubble teams in the whole country right now is Roanoke. So if you're looking at Virginia Wesleyan and Roanoke, what can they do down the stretch here and into the ODAC tournament? Probably both of them want to get to the ODAC final to have a 50-50 chance or better of getting into this tournament. So that ODAC dynamic is going to be really, really interesting. Is there a 3-team scenario? Is there only a 1-team scenario? That will really change the geography of kind of that Virginia area and what the committees can do with the bracket.
Can you give me a sense as a layperson why a conference like the ODAC, other than just taking losses, I see the WIAC taking losses, right? Like I'm seeing other places where losses are happening. So explain to me, if you could, why the ODAC is kind of in this weird flux where a couple more losses and Roanoke and Virginia Wesleyan are suddenly in trouble when it seems like they're scheduling well. The conference seems like a pretty good conference. What's at play that I don't understand in the data?
I mean, I think really it is this year a few more close losses than they've had in the past years. They do schedule tough in the non-conference. They've gotten some wins, but we saw Roanoke lost to in November. I think it was Wesleyan in a really close game. That game could have gone either way. That would have been a big win for Roanoke and the conference. We saw Hampton-Sydney on opening weekend. Or no, sorry, it wasn't Hampton-Sydney. It was Virginia Wesleyan played in that tournament with. Oh, it was Hampton-Sydney with UW
Hampton-Sydney was there too, right? Yeah.
Hampton-Sydney, right? Some games they could have won. Overtime game against UW La Crosse, I think it was. Again, that's a 50-50 game. Could have really helped not just Hampton-Sydney, but again, the ODAC in general. When your conference wins a bunch of non-conference games, and then you bring that back into conference play, that just really helps the NPIs. Rising tide lifts all boats, right? So yeah, I think it is that simple. I think the ODAC just didn't quite win as many games in the non-conference as we had seen them win the last few years.
It's kind of ironic. If they beat La Crosse, then we're maybe talking about the same conversation in the WIAC.
Yeah, I mean that's very true, right? It's that could have the WIAC got those NPI points that the ODAC could have had in that scenario.
Yeah, that's just crazy to start thinking about. Again, we've always said, right, the game on November, well, now it's 7, is just as meaningful in the end. And we always talked about results versus regionally ranked opponents and how the data is going to be considered by committee members. The MPI is essentially still doing that same thing. All right.
Yeah, in a little bit better of a way, I think. But yeah, it's doing similar.
Yeah, of course you think it's a better way. Me, selfishly, I like the old way because, it drew more numbers. Hey, bid thieves. We talk about bid thieves all the time. We talk about who could be a bid thief. We talk about where to find bid thieves. Let's set the standard now. We're talking bid thieves strictly in the sense of this is a conference that's only going to probably get one bid from this one team. Like they're a lock. If they're knocked off, that means they're still getting in, but now we got suddenly a team we weren't expecting. And the WIAC, the ODAC, the NESCAC, and these others might lose a bid that they thought they were going to have. Is that a fair way of saying that, Matt?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
All right. So where should I be watching for these this year?
I think we have 5 that have a really good opportunity to be kind of that pure bid thief, right? You have basically one team and then no one else. Down in Texas, we talked about the SCAC and St. Thomas. They're a lock. They're 100% getting into the tournament. But maybe someone like Concordia, Texas is hanging out there. They just had a close game in the regular season. If they can knock off St. Thomas, then that's a 2-bid league right there out of the SCAC. So that's definitely one to watch. If you're a bubble team, you want St. Thomas to win. Out in the NJAC, we just saw TCNJ win. So maybe TCNJ themselves isn't completely dead, but they're kind of in the not even really quite on the bubble yet scenario. Montclair's looking like a lock, certainly a lock. But if they don't win the NJAC tournament, that's taken another bid from someone. So if you're a bubble team, Montclair State in the NJAC, you're definitely watching that. Out in Minnesota in the MIAC, Gustavus Adolphus, same scenario. Absolutely a lock. They did take one regular season loss in the MIAC, but that's not enough for them to be out of position there. That's one to watch. No one else in the MIAC is in position. In the CNE, Endicott, rock solid, 100% getting in. I don't think they've taken a loss in CNE play at this point, but if they lose the conference tournament, then that's taking up another bid because Endicott's getting in. And then the last one I'll mention here is the SAA. Really interesting dynamic at play. Trinity, Texas looks to be fairly safe getting into the national tournament here, but they might have to go through Rhodes, and Rhodes has already beaten them twice. So you might have a scenario where Rhodes is the bid thief. They've already beaten Trinity twice. Trinity's a lock either way. So SAA, you're hoping for not an upset there, but is that really an upset if Rhodes has already beaten them twice?
Yeah, a bid thief that's not an upset. That's wild. And again, this would hurt the WIAC or the ODAC or the NESCAC or whoever expects to get extra bids. And it's funny, we've had some years, Matt, where we expect a bunch of bid thieves and it doesn't happen. Then we have some years we think it's going to be a little bit more chalk and we get nothing but chaos. Do you want to even dare go out there and say if this is going to be one or the other this year?
No, I mean, I'll certainly look silly if I do. When I run computer simulations, it's starting to show like an average of 2, which would be quite low. I think usually it's 3 or 4 bid thieves. So we're setting up for a low bid thief environment, which I think just goes to guarantee that this is going to be like 4 or 5, and we're going to be craziness. All 5 conferences I just mentioned might go upset. So we'll have to see how that goes. But certainly fun to watch, and those upsets are what makes conference tournament week, sometimes as fun as that first round of the NCAA tournament.
No, agreed. All right, so I appreciate it. That was awesome data all the way from start to finish. Appreciate answering the questions at the beginning as well. Any other things that you have your eyes on that everybody should be watching in the next 10 days as we get ready for NCAA tournaments?
One thing that we noticed last year, Zach and I talked about this on our D3 Datacast episodes, is things change all the time until the last result is in place. You take a loss. There are some teams that are locks at this point, but if you're anywhere near the bubble, you take a loss, especially an unexpected loss, and your fortunes can shift rapidly. So just because a team is top 4, top 8, top 16 right now, that can shift, especially on these days when we have lots of games like a Wednesday night or a Saturday. They'll shift all over the place, and we'll see teams end up in crazy spots. So the NPI system is pretty dynamic in that way, and just expect changes, especially when those unexpected results, upset type things happen.
And speaking of which, you and Zach doing a lot of work behind the scenes and in front of the scenes. What do you guys got that everybody should check out, or what do you have coming up?
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about the bubble picture on our episodes. Every Monday, we have a new episode of D3 Datacast Monday morning. I think this next week, we're going to be talking about these conference tournaments with kind of championship week coming up, looking at the national landscape, maybe some similar conversations that we've had today, but just which conferences are the bid thief conferences? What are you going to watch out for if you're a bubble team? How far do you maybe need to get in your conference tournament to secure an at-large bid? That kind of stuff. So conference tournament week, it's going to be big things on D3 Datacast next week.
Well, Matt, really appreciate all the time you gave me. Thank you so much. And, well, the audience for that matter. Good stuff, and some things to write down and keep track of. And enjoy it. I know you do.
I mean, everyone does Division III basketball because they love it, right? So I have so much fun talking about Division III on this show with you, on our show, and anywhere online, right?
Yeah, right. It's funny how I went from watching you on Twitter going, who is this FF what guy? to now you're just part of the show. Hey, thanks for educating everybody, including myself, and we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road soon.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
Matt Snyder joining us from D3 Datacast. Of course, he and his brother Zach do great stuff. I like the emoji or the pictures of their faces that they put on their imaging. That's probably the most creative part. It's certainly more creative than we have. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, Scott Peterson will join us. We'll do the same thing we just did with a little twists and in some other things on the women's side, but we'll dive into the women's data as well. Scott Peterson's got some good thoughts ahead. You're listening to Hoopsville, the Top 16 show presented by D3 Hoops and from the WBCA studios.
It's on us to stop sexual assault
in any way that we can.
To get a friend home safe.
To never blame the victim.
It's on us.
to stand up.
To make our community safe for all.
It's on us.
It's on us to look out for each other at parties.
It's on us.
To be more than just a bystander.
To step up and say something.
It's on us, all of us.
To stop sexual assault. Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
We've got more schools than Division I, more fans than Division II, and more upsets than March Madness. There's nearly 850 programs with over 11,000 games leading to 2 national championships. And we've been covering it all for over 2 decades. From Eastern to Occidental, from Puget Sound to Piedmont, from Southwestern to the University of New England, and from Hope to Calvin. Nobody covers Division III basketball like we do. We're d3hoops.com at www.d3hoops.com.
Comprehensive learning is being able to adapt to experiences and apply the things that I learned. Being an athlete and juggling academics helped me grow as a person, and things that I've learned, I was able to apply it in another field, putting them into everyday life. Developing comprehensive learning helped me prioritize certain things to make sure I get to where I want to be.
For the love of the game. But for those of us who are Division III student athletes, it's more than that, a lot more.
Sure, the game is important, But as we work so hard to build both mind and body, it's more about team.
That is why NCAA Division III teamed up with Special Olympics. And in giving the gift of sport to those for whom it seemed an impossible dream, we are working to make this a better world.
Help us keep that dream alive.
You can make a difference.
We are the coaches of women's basketball. We are leaders and teachers, dreamers and winners. We are professionals who conduct ourselves ethically and with integrity. We place the education, safety, and well-being of the athletes we coach above all else and teach them the fundamental values they need to succeed in life. We are coaches united for the good of our game and those who play it. We are the WBCA.
I learned a lot of valuable lessons playing college football. I never thought about the health benefits of exercise until I actually started to talk to coaches in college. It's not only just for performance, it's for life. My coaches instilled the importance of well-being, not only building up strength, mental health, getting enough sleep, eating properly is all what it is to be healthy. I decided that I want to go into personal trainer and share my knowledge that I obtained in college about physical and mental well-being.
We are calling you, all of you. We are calling all Division III schools to join our cause.
It's on us to start the change. It's on us to be the change. It's on us. It's on Division III. It's on all of us to stop sexual assault.
It's on us to stop sexual assault.
In any way that we can.
To get a friend home safe.
To never blame the victim.
It's on us.
For some reason, those ads keep running over. I don't understand why. Everything tells it to stop and come back to me, and it never does. We're back. I'm your host, Dave McHugh. We're on the Top 16 show. In our final segment, when we're done with Scott, I'll button things up. We're not going to take another break. We'll button things up on the other side. Appreciate you all tuning in. We're going to talk women's data, just like we did with Matt Snyder, on what this all means. You know, teams might be safe, teams that may be in the hunt, et cetera, et cetera. What can we learn from it all? Hope it's not too complicated, but Scott and Matt have done a great job of putting this into terms that we can all understand, and I certainly appreciate it. And Scott Peterson now joins us on the Hoopsville hotline to dive into the women's side of things. Again, we will bring up the top 8 and the top 16, I should say, on the women's side. Again, just a note, folks, I do have a couple of typos on the women's side. I don't know how they got through. So some of the MPI numbers are wrong. The data is right in terms of what position they're in. Scott, overall, first blush, top 8. This is a pretty interesting top 8, to say the least. Anybody you would call safe?
Really, in the top 8 right now, it's a solid, they're pretty safe all the way through. I would say the top 5 are incredibly safe. Wisconsin, Oshkosh, NYU, Washington, and Lee, Johns Hopkins, and Scranton. Denison is not in the same class as those 5 as far as safety, but they're also quite safe. And then Wisconsin, Whitewater, and Bowdoin. I'm going in a little bit of an alternative order, which is maybe a spoiler, but Whitewater and Bowdoin, I would say, are also quite safe. They both end up in the top 8 at least 2/3 of the time. So at this time, I really don't expect a whole lot of changes. I think Whitewater and Bowdoin could even lose a game and still stay in the top 8. And the current top 6 could definitely lose a game and still stay in the top 8.
I'm kind of curious about something. Oshkosh has 2 losses and are sitting at number 1. Whitewater's got 6 losses at sitting at number 8. Can you give us a quick understanding of why that exists? Because it seems, when you got undefeateds below them, and I get it has to do with your schedule to some degree, but 6 losses, wow. Like what's helping in that scenario?
The real thing that is helping both Oshkosh and Whitewater maintain where they are with those losses is how many strong teams they have beaten, leading to additional quality win bonus. That is really the overwhelming factor. So for example, let me see, Whitewater has 44 points of quality win bonus counting towards them. Bowdoin has 16. And that kind of additional value and reward that you get for beating teams in the top 1, 5, 10, 15, 20 can really elevate you. And the system does have mechanisms through that quality win bonus to say, if you beat a really strong, a really elite team, we are going to reward you for it.
So let's talk about Scranton. They're sitting at 5 right now, undefeated. They've got a NPI number that's 1.2-ish behind 4th. Even further back as you get to 3rd and 2nd, etc. I think there's some fans who look at that and go, geez, they're on the outside looking in at potentially hosting that second weekend because Oshkosh, NYU, Johns Hopkins, WNL. And granted, there's a lot of variables here that could change in the next 10 days. There's a lot of variables that could change before we even get to the second weekend. But does Scranton have any chance of popping into that top 4? What if WNL loses? What if Hopkins loses? What if NYU? Oh, I can't believe I'm saying this. What if NYU loses? Like, is there a scenario Scranton fans can latch onto that maybe gets them that chance in the top 4?
I mean, I don't want to ruin hopes and dreams, but it really looks to me that it would take
rip the Band-Aid off, Scott.
By a team above Scranton for one of them to realistically fall below Scranton. Admittedly, I haven't really looked into an NYU losing a game scenario.
Well,
NYU
why
being
would
in
you?
the UAA with a maximum of 25 games when most of the other teams will play 26, 27, 28 regular season and conference tournament games means that a loss by NYU can relatively have a larger impact, but I still think that they would stay ahead of Scranton. And so I think we are really looking for more than one loss from Johns Hopkins or Washington and Lee. There is potentially a scenario where a whole bunch of losses by past opponents of Johns Hopkins or Washington and Lee paired with a single loss from those teams is enough to drop them below Scranton. But it would be kind of a perfect storm of events for one additional loss, Washington, Lee, and Hopkins to fall below an undefeated Scranton.
Well, and to be fair, we're at a juncture now where multiple losses by either of those is almost impossible. Hopkins has got the regular season finale coming up on Saturday, and I can't remember who they're playing, but we'll get it for you in a minute. And then they're in the conference tournament. So they'd have to somehow pull off, I say they would have to lose on Saturday, and that they're going to play Dickinson. I mean, Dickinson's defense has got the potential. And by the way, Hopkins is not playing with their 6'2" inside presence in Goldstein, but still, they'd have to lose that and lose in the conference tournament. And WNL, same deal. They're basically entering the conference tournament at this juncture. Picking up a second loss is almost impossible. So I hate to say it, but Scranton's kind of on the outside. Was there anything Scranton could have done different? Is there anything that they can learn from this? Or is it just one of those quirky years where things just, you do this and run it back last year, Scranton's sitting at 3?
So NPI, I think, is good at a lot of things. One thing I think it can be better at is ordering teams at the very, very top. And when we're talking about the top 4, you are kind of splitting hairs. And so Scranton doesn't have the same body of elite wins that the other top 4 do. And Scranton also has a weaker bottom of the schedule, kind of the weaker last few wins of their 15 best wins counting towards NPI than some of those other teams do. Maybe you could argue that Scranton could have scheduled better, but in reality, looking at their non-conference schedule, they scheduled pretty well. And again, most teams are scheduling 12 to 24 months in advance when you can't know the specific strength of your opponents.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, I mean, all of the landmark benefited in the last couple years by having 3 teams really in the top 20. And this year, steps back by Catholic and Elizabethtown are probably the largest culprit, if you want to call something a culprit, to Scranton being where they are. If both Catholic and Elizabethtown are 10 spots better in NPI, Scranton's probably in that top 4.
WNL plays Guilford on Saturday, who has lost 3 of their last 4. But if you want maybe some hope, Scranton, WNL getting knocked off by Guilford on Saturday and then falls in the conference tournament. Guilford only lost by 3 to WNL back at the end of January. So we'll put that one on there for your attention. All right, let's talk 9 through 16. And again, folks, I have a couple of typos. Concordia Moorhead does not have an MPI of 91.9, and UChicago does not have an MPI of 71.4. But, Scott, 9 through 16 here, this is kind of the interesting portion for the opening weekend. Where do you see in terms of safe here?
So you did ask me specifically about the top 8, how safe are they? And I think that while that top 8 is safe, there are chances for John Carroll, Wisconsin Platteville, and Hope to get into the top 8.
Interesting.
But
Okay.
it would definitely require losses from Whitewater and Bowdoin. I don't know if one loss from each would be enough. It definitely would require John Carroll, Wisconsin Platteville, or Hope to go undefeated to end their season and through the conference tournament. But there are some opportunities for those 3 teams to move into the top 8. Albeit kind of slight at this time. And then when it comes to the top 16, I think it is good to remember what Kristen Hughes said, is that they prioritize seeding and they prioritize matchups. And so I don't want to make a relative statement to how the men's committee is prioritizing things, but even though we know that being in the top 16 is not a guarantee to hosting, it might be even more so when it comes to the women's committee and wanting to really protect the seeding and the matchups. So I do have 2 teams that are currently in the top 16 that my simulations say will move out. And that's Carroll and Chicago in the 15 and 16 spots. And then the 2 teams moving in would be Baldwin Wallace, currently 17th, and Wash U, currently 18th. But, it's still going to, I think, come down to the specific matchups and the specific seating that the women's committee sees and wants to preserve. I do think that Wash U and Baldwin Wallace moving into the top 16 are in good spots geographically, especially Baldwin Wallace, to be in a good spot to host. But those are kind of the 2 teams potentially moving out and the 2 teams potentially moving in. And I think that there are chances for teams like Trine and Bates to move into the top 16, but probably would need a good deal of help from above them.
Really interesting. We do have a good spread across the country in terms of this 1 through 16. UChicago's the only one with both teams in the top 16. As you said, potentially UChicago could fall out of the women's top 16. On the men's side, we've got an injury worry, so we may not even have to deal with the idea of priorities and duels and any of that stuff. All right, so let me flip the tables on you a little bit here. One of the things I know a lot of people like to look at the data and go, "Oh, our team's okay. We're fine. We're going to make the tournament. We're good to go. Everything's fine. Hey, don't worry about it. I know we want to go win the conference, but if we take a loss, it won't be the end of the world." Who's maybe not looking at their data right and could be in some jeopardy if they don't have all their things in a row?
Yeah, 2 teams that I think would be in serious trouble if they lose one more game. And I think most likely that loss would come in the conference tournament. And so they would need an at-large bid. And I think they would be in serious trouble. And those 2 teams are Southern Maine out of the Little East and Christopher Newport from the Coast to Coast. Currently 28th and 29th in NPI, which does feel safe. But it's because of their body of work leaves them more susceptible to like a loss impacts them more than other teams' body of work that makes up their NPI, paired with the types of teams that they would be losing to are weaker than the types of teams that a lot of other front runners in a conference would be losing to. And so both of those teams get an at-large bid less than 1/3 of the time if they do lose in their conference tournament. It definitely doesn't go to 0. There are scenarios where they still make it, but less than 1 in 3 is a pretty low rate of occurrence.
Well, it's wild, right? You think you're in a pretty good spot, and it shows how data in a lot of different places is going to have the impact other than just the result you have in front of you. So wake up, Southern Maine, who's a favorite of mine. Get the job done in the Little East and elsewhere, you all, and just don't worry about it. Punch your own ticket. We say that all the time anyway, right? Mm-hmm. Conference races worth a watch. Any? We talked about the ODAC on the men's side. Is there any on the women's side that are worth taking a little gander at and enjoy?
Absolutely. I've got to pull up a couple things here to reference. So the Centennial is going to be a great one to follow. Gettysburg, with a big win over McDaniel, has fairly close to punched their ticket.
Oh, okay.
And that loss has moved McDaniel to very unlikely to being in that at-large picture. And so actually the Centennial might be a little bit down since we talked a couple days ago, as far as a level of interest in that conference race. Another one would be the Landmark, where Scranton is in a lock, but Susquehanna, I think, has a really good chance to make the NCAA tournament, even if they do not win the Landmark tournament. I think they would need to make it to the finals, though. If they lose in the semifinals, they might be in a tough spot. And so Catholic and Elizabethtown are looking to play spoiler there in the Landmark. The OAC is interesting, with Baldwin Wallace an overwhelming lock to make the tournament, even if they lose. But Otterbein is right on the bubble and really needs a good performance in the OAC tournament. But there's other strong teams in the OAC tournament that could, pose problems for both Otterbein and Mount Union. And then the fourth conference race to really watch, conference tournament to watch, is the MIAC. Right now, St. Scholastica and Gustavus Adolphus are playing in the regular season. But when it comes to the MIAC tournament, Gustavus Adolphus and St. Mary's are two really strong teams right on the bubble, going to be in the conversation for the NCAA tournament. And then higher up, Concordia, Moorhead, and Bethel are fairly assured to be in the NCAA tournament. But there's, Concordia, Moorhead wants to push themselves as high as possible in the top 16. And then Gustavus Adolphus and St. Mary's trying to hang on to a spot, with other teams trying to play spoiler. And, there's a tiny chance that Hamlin gets in. If they probably would have to win all the way through to the conference final and then also get some help from across the nation.
That's still impressive, though, grouping. Yeah, the Centennial's an interesting beast. By the way, that's a really good McDaniel team. It just hasn't gotten that one win. I think once they figure out that one win, they'll be in pretty good shape. All right, so we talked with Matt about bid thieves, and I'm going to warn everybody, we're going to put a graphic up here shortly. Some things have slightly changed when Scott and I have talked, but I ran out of time to update the graphic, so they might be slightly adjusted, but for the most part, vast majority of it exists. But Scott, on the women's side, this bid thief kind of takes on a little bit of a different tone. There are some, right, that are just that team's locked to get in no matter how, so this will steal some bids. And then some others that they kind of have a couple, but they've got good enough teams, as you said, in the OAC, for example, who could show up. So let's talk bid thieves, and let's start with those one lock ones.
Yeah, so some of because, for there to be a reasonable chance at a bid thief, you have to have a top team that would get into the NCAA tournament via an at-large bid, even if they lose a game. But you have to have other teams who have a decent chance at beating that top team, and that doesn't, that pairing doesn't always happen. But one of the conferences is the NACC, where Wisconsin Lutheran does look pretty safe to me, even if they lose another game. But especially Aurora, but also St. Norbert are really strong competitors that are going to be gunning for them in the NACC tournament. So if Aurora or St. Norbert or anyone else in that NACC tournament other than Wisconsin Lutheran wins it, that would be a bid thieved. We've also got the Midwest Conference. Ripon is a lock, but Lawrence and Knox are worthy challengers coming at Ripon. We've got the NUMAC with Smith. They are also an overwhelming lock, and there's a group of, Babson, Clark, WPI, and Coast Guard have all had their moments this year, and they would be bid thieves if they come out of the NUMAC. And then in the NJAC, William Patterson has had a great year, but TCNJ is a very strong opponent as well, and there are others in the NJAC that are good teams. So those are really the four main ones where there's one top team and everyone else in the conference does not have an at-large chance and are all just trying to win that conference tournament.
Also on the screen, I've got these kind of 2+ locked teams, and you talked a little bit about the OAC with Baldwin-Wallace and Otterbein, some kind of bubble in right now with teams that can upset. And we've got on the screen, we got a couple other conferences. Can you go through reasons like the MIA, NESCAC, and SUNYAC kind of have this odd 2-lock bid thief opportunity?
Yeah, so take the MIAA. Hope and Trine are both locks to make the NCAA tournament, but Calvin and Albion are worthy challengers that can win the MIAA tournament as well. It's just that with those two top teams who are if a team's a lock, they're a really good team, hard to beat. And it's harder for a team to beat two of them, since you're likely going to have to beat one of Hope or Trine in the semi and then the other one in the final. It makes it an unlikely bid thief scenario compared to the one top team conferences, but it's still possible. Another one of those two top teams is the NESCAC with Bowdoin and Bates. They are NCAA tournament locks, and the rest of the NESCAC do not have an at-large chance, and so are coming for Bowdoin and Bates. In the OAC, Baldwin-Wallace is a lock, and Otterbein is right on the bubble. And so, there are the other challengers, Mount Union, Marietta, and Ohio Northern, who would really be the ones thieving a bid from the rest of the nation. And then in the SUNYAC, another one of this double team up top, New Paltz and Cortland are both locks. And so if you're on the bubble, you do not want SUNY Canton or Plattsburgh or Oswego pulling an upset and winning the SUNYAC.
We did have Trinity, Connecticut on there for the NESCAC, folks. That's more bubbly than it used to be. So forgive my addition to that there. You do not need to keep it going. You do not need to write into that as dead on. Scott, I mean, again, it just proves we've got a lot in the next 10 days. As much as women's basketball has not maybe been as electric. We got a lot of undefeated teams and things have been kind of status quo. There's still a lot that can happen in these 10 days. And as you've pointed out on several occasions, the data could change with just the result of one game.
Yeah, NYU is not at its same dominant level, and parity has increased throughout the entire division, and it makes for really, really wonderful, intense basketball down the stretch. I mentioned Gustavus Adolphus and St. Scholastica playing right now, but Gustavus Adolphus and St. Mary's play each other on the last day of the regular season, of the MIAC regular season. And that could be an NCAA tournament play-in game. And I think it's really cool that we can have such a clear awareness of the gravity of these games coming down the stretch. We just had Catholic Susquehanna. We just had Gettysburg McDaniel. There's been a lot of really great ODAC matchups, and there's a lot at stake with each game, and it's been a lot of fun following it.
Speaking of which, the Gusties lead St. Scholastica 47-38, end of third. 10 minutes to play in that one. They beat them 20-13 in that third quarter alone. So again, could have a huge impact on everything as we've just talked about. Scott, appreciate it. Any other things that you want to make sure people are keeping in mind in these 10 days before we let you go?
Nothing just overall, but I think another interesting set of games that just popped into my mind is Emory and Carnegie Mellon play back-to-back games against each other.
Right.
And those have massive, massive implications for each of them and for all of the other teams on the bubble. Those are going to be huge games.
Yeah, that's right. I just remembered that because we aren't considering them from that data yet because we haven't seen them play because of the weather. That's a great one. Good call, sir. Thank you very much.
And the UAA also doesn't pop up in a lot of our conversations because they don't have a conference tournament, but that doesn't mean their games almost have more weight because we know that there's no opportunity to win the conference tournament from the UAA, so you got 25 games to get your business done.
Yeah, no, great point. Yeah, it's just, I can't remember the last time the UAA had to make a game up in the middle of the week. They just seem to get lucky with the weather every stubborn year. Hey, Scott, really appreciate the time, appreciate the perspective, and I look forward to seeing how this all plays out and following you along. Do you want anything that you're working on in terms of breaking this all down? We've got at least one link up to your the D3 lab, but anything else to give everybody?
The two big things going on is I'm updating all kinds of stuff on my website, the d3statlab.com. And on the Saturday of conference tournament weekend, so that'll be February 28th, Riley Zayas and I will be live on YouTube as all of those, I think 28 of the 43 conference tournaments have their championship game on that Saturday. And so we will be live when the bulk of those are finishing up, running updated NPI after probably every couple results. And I just spent time improving the performance of my simulations. So they run in 8 minutes instead of 14 minutes, and it makes it easier for me more feasible to run an extra set of simulations midday to give everyone the most up-to-date picture on where their teams are at and what other results they might need to go their way for their teams to make it into the NCAA tournament. Awesome.
I look forward to it. You do good work. I appreciate your time, you and Riley and Matt as well. And enjoy it, sir. I know you will, but my main question is, are you going to be able to handle Hope Calvin? I didn't even bother asking Matt that. Are you going to be able to survive the final Hope Calvin of the season?
Hopefully. Should be a great one as always.
The fact that I got a Hope and a Calvin guy on here doing stats is just great. And data. You couldn't write this if I tried. Hey, Scott, take care. Thank you for the time.
See you later.
Scott Peterson joining us here on the Hoopsville Hotline, talking to all the women there. For some reason, the website on his thing said state. I took the E off. It doesn't anymore. Great stuff from everybody. Really appreciate it. Again, your top 16, understanding who's in it, but understanding that's not a guarantee. That's not a lock. But if the NCAA tournament started now, those teams would be in position to most likely host. We don't have a lot of crossover this year in terms of duels, so I don't think we're going to have a lot of those tough choices like they did with NYU last year, sending the men on the road in the opening weekend and having the women on the road the second weekend. But there's a lot to unpack still. 10 days. Just the fact, watch Montclair lose last night. They went from, I think, 5th in the NPI. Let me see if I can call that up real quick, because the great thing about the NCAA site, I know the guys have this too, but it's something I picked up on the NCAA site, is they tell you where the team was ranked the previous NPI run. So if you go to men's basketball in Division III right now and call up the NPI, and you go to Montclair, who's sitting in the 10th spot, they were previously 6th. So that loss to TCNJ dropped them 4 spots. Interesting enough, Randolph-Macon went from 4th to 3rd, and Chicago from 3rd to 4th. In the last run because of other results that come in, other things that take place. Hood was 17th. They're now sitting in 15th. Redlands was 24th. They're now sitting in 16th. Whitewater was 23rd. They're now sitting in 17th. So this data always changes and always moves. So this show's great. I hope you got some insight and got some bit thieves to watch out for, certainly on the men's and women's side. And I hope you learned something from the committee chairs as well. They had some good information, good conversation there. We'll get into more nitty-gritty stuff, I think, with them when we talk to them right as they're doing the bracketing, and then when we talk to them when the bracketing is done. It's interesting because when I listen to their answers based on what I'm asking them, I hear things because I've been talking with them or in the weeds or, going full on with all this stuff a lot. You hear it differently. So I'd be fascinated to hear what you hear from those conversations. And with that, we wrap it up. It's been a long day. We've had 2 shows. If you missed our earlier show today, we had great conversation with both St. Joseph, Connecticut, Glenn Miller, and St. Joseph's, Connecticut, Glenn Miller, and St. Joseph, Maine, Tyler Ackley, on the showdown in the GNAC coming up on Saturday. We also talked to Kent Dernbach from Wisconsin Stevens Point on just the wackiness of everything and what they think their chances are in the conference tournament. Then on the women's side, we talked to Transylvania women's basketball coach Hannah Klein about taking over the program, where it's become, their dip isn't really a dip in the grand scheme of things, how they're still competitive and how good that program is. And then we talked to Nazareth women's basketball coach Kelly Dunn-Romig. And by the way, the Dunn family, fascinating family. You might know him if you know Division III. Her brother Greg Dunn, who was the head coach at Brockport. Nazareth's got a rich basketball history, and it was great to chat with her. If you missed any of that, it's online and available on demand. It's also the podcast is available, as will this show if you missed it. And also, please help us continue our work. BuyMeACoffee.com/Hoopsville. The Top 25 show that aired on Monday is now available for everybody to watch. Next Monday's show will only be available live and on demand initially for Hoopsville members. So sign up for Role Player or Higher. Also, my ballot is available to you, those of you who've signed up as well. You can see my top 25 ballot for this past week or the entire season. The only thing we ask is please don't share that with everybody else so that we can at least have some type of successful membership. Go to buymeacoffee.com/Hoopsville. There's a donation section. If you're asked how many coffees you want to buy me, which I appreciate, that's a donation. You can make it monthly if you'd like, or go down to the membership. Sign up for the membership. You get some extra perks and some other things that are coming along. Got a lot to talk about in the next 10 days. We'll be on the air Monday at 12 Eastern with our normal show, 8:30 with our Top 25 show. Then next Thursday, noon Eastern for our regular show. And then we'll let you know what we're doing for Selection Sunday and Bracket Breakdown, though it looks like on March 2nd, we're going to start breaking the brackets down at 4 p.m. Eastern with a chat with both committee chairs. We plan to talk to both committee chairs, both on our selection show and our breakdown show. The bracket show is going to depend on my schedule. Hopefully we can start that by about 6 or 6:30 Eastern time, and we'll figure out how we do it. We'll definitely talk to some teams who have punched their tickets to the NCAA tournament, and we'll talk a little bit about how these brackets may come together. Ryan Scott does good work with that. So does Pat Coleman. We'll talk to some of the data guys, try and start figuring out how these brackets will come together. And with that, we sign off. Thank you for participating. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something from it all. And again, go to buymeacoffee.com/Hoopsville to help support our work as well. By the way, you got a couple of boxes in the studio. We'll be videotaping maybe later tonight and putting them together so that we can see what people have sent us. Jerseys, swag, who knows? There might be some good stuff. We'll get to it. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Hope you enjoyed it. If you can follow us on Twitter at D3Hoopsville, hashtag Hoopsville, also Instagram and Threads. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/Hoopsville, along with Blue Sky, where we're dabbling with it. And of course, we're streaming on all kinds of different devices and our podcast as well. Thanks to Cam Fuller at St. Norbert and Kristen Hughes at Smith, our committee chairs. Thanks very much to Matt Snyder and Scott Peterson on the data side of things. We have some links on our show page to some episodes that they've had recently and some other work that you can get more in depth if you really want to go in the weeds on these things. And of course, thanks to everybody at D3Hoops.com for their help, and of course, the Women's Basketball Coaches Association as well. If you want to talk Division III basketball, you've got to listen to Hoopsville, and our next show is coming up on Monday. But you also go back and check the archives. A lot of information to digest, a lot of good games ahead, a lot of stuff to talk about, and I hope you'll tune in to as many Hoopsvilles as you can to learn more about it. Thanks for watching this one. It's been another Top 16 show here on Hoopsville. Thanks for tuning in. See you soon.